Chapter 1330. Lanxue Yuyu, awesome, my streamer. So there really was a letter of challenge in ancient times. Xingyue Tianyun, that's not the point. The point is that my mind is filled with Zhuge Liang sent a letter of challenge to us for a decisive battle tomorrow. How should we fight the enemy? Am I overthinking it, or have I logged too much on Bilibili? I'm looking forward to the streamer and Huang Song quarreling in front of the battlefield. In this season, the days were short and the nights were long. The sky darkened early. Before the end of the broadcast, it was already dark outside. The battle would begin the next day. Jiang Pengji took her time tonight. Her slender fingers played with the bean-sized candlelight. No one knew what she was thinking. Unbeknownst to her, outsiders thought that Jiang Pengji was daydreaming, but she was actually investigating the surrounding environment. Because Huang Song's battle was very important, Jiang Pengji did not dare to take it lightly. She did not give Huang Song a chance to sneak an attack. Almost every day, she had to spread out her mental strength to investigate the enemy within 100 miles. There was no progress before, but today there was a different discovery. She furrowed her brows in deep thought. As she withdrew her mental strength, she guessed the origin of the troops. Tomorrow was the decisive battle. She did not want to be attacked by an unknown enemy halfway through the battle. Jiang Pengji shouted to the outside, "Quickly summon the generals. Tell them that I have something important to discuss." She suddenly shouted. Qin Gong and the others naturally rushed over without even taking off their armors. Tomorrow's decisive battle. Jiang Pengji glanced at the few of them and pointed to two newly promoted newcomers. The profession of a general was obtained through military merits. Not only did it require a certain amount of luck, but it also required a stage to perform. Jiang Pengji was quite generous in this aspect. This was also one of the reasons for the internal unity. She then said to Xie Zhe, "Yuangue, you will lead the troops to guard the rear tomorrow." Xie Zhe originally thought that there would be some people, but he was dumbfounded when he heard this. Why? Why was he the one guarding the rear? Xie Zhe was the vanguard general. Logically, he should be the vanguard. She changed her mind at the last minute and transferred him to the rear. He plucked up the courage to ask. Jiang Pengji also gave him a reason. Jiang Pengji said seriously, "I just received a secret report. There will be changes in the battlefield tomorrow. I asked you to guard the rear out of consideration as a whole." Xie Zhe nodded his head and stepped out to receive the order. He returned to his original valiant and high-spirited attitude, as if he could raise his spear and kill the enemy right now. Qin Gong was younger than Xie Zhe, but he definitely had more experience on the battlefield than Xie Zhe, so he was naturally more sensitive. There's a change in the battlefield tomorrow? Could it be that Huang Song still has some tricks up his sleeves? I'm not sure yet. We'll know tomorrow, Jiang Pengji said. Yuan Gui, you must guard the rear well. Don't let your guard down. Even though there were very few generals under her command who thought they were smart and made decisions on their own, those who were young and famous were always more impetuous. They were eager to perform meritorious deeds, so it was inevitable that they would drop the ball at critical moments. Jiang Pengji had to remind them from time to time to prevent them from being hot-blooded. Generals were a profession where their heads were tied to their waistbands. If their brains weren't good, how long could they live? After a round of discussion, Jiang Pengji closed the streaming room, washed up, and went to bed. She needed to rejuvenate herself. There would be a big battle the next day. At the same time, the troops led by Feng Zhu were resting at a place dozens of miles away. The scouts sent out had also gotten a clear understanding of the situation at the front lines. Knowing that the decisive battle between his lord and Jiang Pengji had yet to begin, Feng Zhu heaved a long sigh of relief. He had finally made it in time. A general hesitantly asked Feng Zhu, military counselor, "Should we rush over to meet up with our lord tonight, or, Feng Zhu shook his head and said thoughtfully, if we rush over tonight, most of our troops will be exhausted. They won't have much combat power left. How can we help our lord tomorrow? It's better to let the army rest for a while. When the two armies face off tomorrow, you and I will lead the troops to launch a sneak attack from behind while Lu Shi is lax. We'll take her by surprise and attack her when she's unprepared. This will definitely cause Lu Shi to panic. In this way, the pressure on our lord's side will be reduced. Feng Zhu withdrew his troops from the front lines. In order to confuse Qiguanrang, he specially led his troops to take a detour to mislead Qiguanrang, making him think that he was not rushing to the front lines but had sent his troops back to reinforce Haozhou. In other words, Jiang Pengji did not know that Feng Zhu's troops had already arrived. In this way, Jiang Pengji would be defenseless when Feng Zhu launched a sneak attack from behind tomorrow. How could they know that Jiang Pengji was different from them? She had long noticed Feng Zhu's actions. The next day, the sky was dimly lit, and the morning sun shone faintly. The troops of the two armies confronted each other in the cold wind. Banners fluttered in the wind, and the battlefield was filled with a somber atmosphere. The banners with the word Lu or Huang written on them fluttered in the wind, making a loud sound. The swords and spears flashed with cold light, reflecting the resolute faces of their owners. The morale of the troops was twisted into a ball. The murderous aura of the military formation filled the sky, and even the air was cold. Under such an atmosphere, the salted fish in the streaming room did not dare to joke. Jiang Pengji was dressed in red clothes and silver armor. Her red tassel helmet covered most of her face, but it could not hide the undercurrent that surged in her eyes. Behind her, the troops wore bright armor and were in high spirits. Their morale had reached its peak. In the face of such a lineup, it was impossible for Huang Song's side to not feel pressured. However, he had no way out. Huang Song closed his eyes and opened them again. His eyes were calm. If it was in the past, fighting a war had to follow procedures. Nowadays, it was more and more casual. Fighting a war was fighting a war. Huang Song was not foolish enough to suggest a battle between generals. He knew that Jiang Pengji's martial strength alone was enough to challenge everyone, regardless of whether it was one-on-one, or a group fight. Under such circumstances, the troops of the two sides seemed to have no other activities other than fighting. They could not possibly let more than 200,000 people watch their lord chat in front of the battlefield, could they? Beat the drums. At the command, the drummers pushed out hundreds of war chariots with big cowhide drums. Dong! 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 The sound of the war drums boosted the morale of the whole army. Jiang Pengji also raised her hand and waved, indicating that the war drums could begin. The military formation stretched for several miles. The two armies added up to more than 200,000 troops and horses. They had to rely on this method to transmit all kinds of information. The beating of the drums was not only to boost morale, but also to inform the troops. Everyone perked up. Those who were absent-minded came back to their senses. Those who were sleepy woke up. The big battle was about to begin. Jiang Pengji was the commander-in-chief for this battle. Although Luoyue was capable, he had been squatting in the rear to deal with security and border defense all year round. He did not have much actual experience in commanding troops. Regarding this, Luoyue was not the least bit unwilling. If the Lord commanded the troops, it meant that she could not act recklessly. Qin Gong and the others rubbed their palms together. Every one of them was in high spirits. Without waiting for Jiang Pengji to give the order, the enemy troops could not hold back anymore. Shouts of "kill" resounded through the sky, causing pain in one's ears. The soldiers who carried the flags waved the flags. It was as if black clouds were floating in the sky. The soldiers who beat the drums worked even harder. Because they used all their strength to beat the drums, the muscles on their arms tightened. One arm was as thick as an ordinary person's thigh. Their oily sweat soaked their skin until it glistened. Jiang Pengji smiled, drew her sword, and gave the order. Chapter 1331. The cavalry played a pivotal role on the battlefield. Without large-scale popularization or further development of firearms, the myth of the cavalry was almost unbreakable. It was not that the cavalry could not be dealt with, but the price paid was far greater than the gains. This was also the horror of the cavalry. The cavalry was extremely mobile. Whether it was a joint attack or a roundabout retreat, how could the two-legged people outrun the four-legged horses? Their ability to collide and kill was also one of the cornerstones of the cavalry myth. In addition, ancient wars were very dependent on military formations, which could be integrated into a whole, thus achieving a sublimation from quantitative change to qualitative change. Not only could the cavalry collide and cut the military formation, but it could also prevent the enemy from being able to form an effective defense or attack. Jiang Pengji's cavalry not only consisted of light cavalry, but also heavy cavalry that had defeated the northern borderline. One light cavalry and one heavy cavalry cooperated with each other. Whether it was an attack or something else, the effect was naturally stronger than that of a single unit. Huang Song attached so much importance to her that he naturally knew this. In order to deal with this terrifying cavalry battalion, he discussed with everyone for a long time and finally came up with a way to slightly restrain them. They adopted a more flexible and changeable military formation. At the same time, they avoided the sharp edge and lured the enemy into the formation, then strangled them. The cavalry that ran were wolves and tigers. The cavalry that fell into the swamp of the sea of people were lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Their ability was limited. In order not to let the enemy discover that there was something fishy about the military formation, Huang Song and the others also made some changes to the vanguard. This method was no problem for ordinary people, but for Jiang Pengji, it was superfluous. Not to mention her own spiritual ability, even the high-altitude camera in the streaming room could overlook the situation from a certain angle. She keenly discovered the characteristics of Huang Song's military formation and gave another order. The messenger received the order and immediately sent the message out. The rhythm of the bugle horn and military drums suddenly changed. At that moment, the heavy cavalry had already resisted the tide-like rain of arrows and was less than 100 feet away from the enemy's front line. Such a short distance was just a blink of an eye for the warhorses that were running at full speed. The soldiers on horseback heard the order to change. They pulled the reins tightly to direct the warhorses to change direction while they raised their thick shields and smashed the charging enemy heavily. The enemy used a joint attack technique to stab the warhorses under the cavalry. Even though the warhorses were wearing thick armor, they still neighed in pain. The heavy cavalry under Jiang Pengji burned a lot of money. The weight of the men and horses could be called human-shaped tanks. Along the way, it was the most violent and powerful suppression. That kind of strength was not something that an ordinary body of flesh and blood could withstand. They broke through in an instant, but they didn't go straight in. Instead, they charged towards the flanks of the enemy in a wide arc. It was even simpler for the light cavalry. After receiving the order, they immediately split into several groups and circled around to the enemy's flanks. From the looks of it, the cavalry is afraid? The soldiers under Huang Song's tent did not know what was going on. Only Huang Song and his men, who had been paying close attention to the battlefield, were shocked. The cavalry wasn't scared. They knew that there was a trap in front of them, so they didn't want to make unnecessary sacrifices. Instead, they decided to attack the two flanks where the defense was weaker. When Cheng Jing thought of this possibility, he secretly clenched his fists. At the same time, he was in disbelief. His opponent's reaction was too fast. Compared to Cheng Jing's calmness, Huang Song's reaction was much more obvious. Huang Song murmured, Lanting, oh Lanting, you're really my nemesis. Even though his heart was heavy, Huang Song did not reveal a dejected expression. He was the lord. If he panicked, what would happen to his subordinates? Because the cavalry didn't really affect the enemy's main force, when the two armies collided, the situation of the battle could be said to be tragic. Jiang Pengji looked at the situation on the battlefield. She suppressed the urge to join the battle. Instead, she calmly commanded the dispatches and reinforcements. Watching from afar, Han Yu couldn't help but sigh. My lord really has the demeanor of a brave general. Yang Si added, my lord also has the wisdom of a strategist. Fortunately, there was only one lord like this. If there were a few more, wouldn't the strategists and generals lose their jobs and be laid off? At the same time, Wei Ci had a solemn look on his face. He knew that the balance of the battlefield was slowly tilting towards his lord. However, Feng Ju, who was under Huang Song's tent, still hadn't appeared. This made him a little worried for no reason. Wei Ci would not underestimate anyone who had lived in troubled times. After all, Feng Ju was an important minister who had once assisted His Majesty. While he was deep in thought, the front line was already in a mess. Not long after, there were corpses lying on the ground. The battle cries of the two sides not only resounded in the sky, but even the gravel on the ground trembled slightly. Luo Yu was in charge of the left wing, Qin Gong was the vanguard, and the right wing was led by Jiang Nongqin, who was newly promoted. Both sides infiltrated each other and fought each other. If not for the difference in clothes, they really wouldn't be able to tell who was the enemy. Someone had just killed the enemy with one foot, and then his body was pierced through by the enemy's weapon. Yang Si seemed very calm, but his eyes kept drifting in a certain direction. In fact, even if he sat on horseback, this altitude was not enough to cross over the wall of people, but he could not help but want to see. It didn't matter in the past, but after clarifying his intentions, he felt that there was nothing more torturous than the combination of civil and military. What was a general? It was a precarious profession, and the battlefield was so chaotic that even immortals could be accidentally injured. Sigh, how worrisome. Han Yu rolled his eyes, glanced at him, and asked, what are you worried about? The situation is favorable to our army. What are you worried about? Yang Si said, you don't understand. This is concern. Han Yu sneered, my son, Han Run, has been studying at the Golden Scale Academy for a long time. A single man who didn't even have a wife mocked him for not knowing how to care for his wife and daughter. Who gave him the courage? Yang Si, perhaps, it was the Lord. Han Yu didn't have much contact with Jiang Nongqin, but he knew that she was unusually quiet. Although she was a woman, she was no less than an ordinary general. To be honest, in his opinion, Yang Si was a rotten piece of wood, and he really couldn't afford to be associated with her. If Yang Si knew about this, he would definitely explode in anger and draw his sword to hack Han Yu. Jiang Nongqin was leading the right wing to deal with the enemy. Because of her prestige in the army over the years, the generals under the Lord's command didn't dare to look down on her, not to mention those ordinary generals who had been promoted. No one dared to protest or question her orders, so the situation on the right wing was relatively stable, and it was difficult for the enemy to expand their victory. On the one hand, she cooperated with the Middle Army to contain the enemy, and on the other hand, she joined forces with the Middle Army to make the enemy suffer. Looking at her like this, who wouldn't give her a thumbs up? They were not convinced by women, except for two exceptions. One was the unfathomable lord, and the other was the dignified Captain Jiang. Although Jiang Nongqin was an old woman, there were many people who secretly liked her, but they just didn't have the guts to say it out. Captain Jiang, there is a change in the rear. Chapter 1332. The battle at the front was in full swing, and Xie was so bored that he was almost moldy. However, military orders had to be obeyed. Even if there was nothing wrong, Xie still had to be alert and be extremely vigilant. Have the scouts we sent out returned? Xie paid attention to the battle situation at the front and ordered the soldiers to be ready for battle. Reporting to General, there is no news yet. The deputy general pressed the sword at his waist with his left hand and looked at the front solemnly. He asked Xie in a low voice, "General, why did the Lord send the general? Huang Song's troops are not as good as ours. He has already used up all his troops. How could he have the strength to launch a sneak attack?" For a general, there was no future without military merits. How did military merits come about? Naturally, they were piled up with the enemy's heads. Hiding in the safer rear, they didn't even see the shadow of the enemy. Wasn't this a waste of time? Their lord's future was getting brighter and brighter. Once Huang Song was destroyed, she would be the ruler of all of Dongqing. It was a small peak of her life. They didn't know what the future would be. Did the Lord want to establish a stable country or continue to expand? If it was the latter, it would be best. If it was the former, one less battle meant one less chance to be promoted. When the world was at peace, it would not be so easy for a general to be promoted. This time, being sent to the rear was equivalent to being on a cold bench. The deputy general who assisted Xie was naturally worried. This is the Lord's order. We will follow it. She must have a reason for this arrangement. Let everyone be alert so that the enemy doesn't take advantage of any loopholes. Compared to the deputy general's worry, Xie was calm. He raised his hand and took out a handkerchief from his armor to wipe the shiny shaft. He lowered his eyes and said, "If there is any trouble at the rear, the Lord will punish us. Neither you nor I can afford to bear the consequences." The deputy general thought of his lord's temper and suddenly sweated profusely. Of all the people he questioned the Lord's orders? "I will do it now." The deputy general immediately left. Xie recalled the deputy general's words and frowned slightly. Although he was not the Lord's die-hard fan, the Lord made decisions like a god and rarely made mistakes. The Lord said that the enemy might launch a sneak attack at the rear, so this news was most likely true. The only problem was, when would the enemy appear? The rear was too comfortable and the soldiers were more or less relaxed. This was not a good sign. Xie could only send someone to constantly remind the soldiers in his tent not to be careless. Report. Just as the deputy general was about to report to Xie, he heard a shout in his ear. What happened? The person said, "We found a bloodied warhorse just now." The deputy general was shocked and quickly said, "Let's go and take a look." It was a maroon warhorse. Its body was not as tall and strong as the heavy cavalry warhorses. It had a tubular body, a narrow chest, a long back, and shallow ribs. Although its back was narrow, it was strong and powerful. Its muscles were more developed than ordinary warhorses, and its fur was glossy. Those who were familiar with the breed of warhorses could tell at a glance that this horse was from the northern borderline and definitely had the bloodline of the Fergana horse of Shalan. It was fast, had great endurance, and came and went like the wind. Of course, this kind of horse was also specially allocated to scouts to ensure their mobility so that they could escape as soon as they discovered the enemy. The deputy general looked at the warhorse with a heavy expression. He raised his hand and touched the bloodstain. With a slight sniff, he knew that it was human blood and not horse blood. The soldier said, "Deputy General, this warhorse's abdomen is slightly injured." The deputy general looked in the direction that the soldier was pointing and saw a palm-long wound on the side of the horse's abdomen. Some of the blood had already coagulated. With his many years of experience, he could tell at a glance what kind of sharp weapon had caused the wound. "The horse is back. Where is the person?" the deputy general asked. The soldier replied, "I didn't find him. When the horse came back, I didn't see anyone." The deputy general's heart sank. He vaguely guessed that the scout had died. He asked again, other than this horse, did any other horses come back? The soldier shook his head. The deputy general quickly passed the news to Xiaofan. The mission of this batch of scouts was not to investigate the front but the rear. Now they had been killed. If not for the fact that the horse knew the way and ran back with injuries, they probably wouldn't have found it. It could be seen that the Lord's guess was correct. There was indeed an enemy force hiding in the dark. Hearing the deputy general's words, Xiaofan's brows furrowed, leaving faint wrinkles between his brows. Order the entire army to be on guard. He knew very well what kind of equipment his scouts were equipped with. Almost all of them were equipped with good horses that had both speed and endurance. Under such circumstances, they were still killed by the enemy. It could be seen that the enemy was not easy to deal with. If the warhorse hadn't come back on its own, Xiaofan wouldn't have known that the enemy had appeared. Not long after he issued the order, there was a rumbling sound from behind. The ground shook even more violently. Kill! Accompanied by thunderous shouts, a dense horde of enemies quickly appeared in their field of vision. The deputy general's warhorse was startled. He was shocked by the number of enemies. He called out to Xiaofan loudly, "General, the enemy is here." Xiaofan glanced at them and his face darkened. The enemy was less than 3 miles away. How did they do it so close? If the Lord hadn't warned them, the enemy would have launched a sneak attack and the army would have suffered heavy losses. What are you panicking for? Get into formation. Xiaofan shouted, as if he knew what was going on. 3 miles was nothing to the enemy cavalry. These cavalry were not easy to deal with. They were very skilled with their bows and arrows. Before they even got close, the arrows had already fallen. Xiaofan was calm. On one hand, he commanded the soldiers to block the arrows with the shield wall. On the other hand, he ordered the archers to shoot at the enemy under the protection of the shield wall. He tried to clear out the nearest wave of enemies. However, the distance between the two sides was too short. The archers couldn't shoot more than a few rounds. The enemy cavalry opened the way, and the troops behind them followed closely. There were tens of thousands of them. Seeing that the enemy cavalry was close, Xiaofan ordered the soldiers to line up with spears more than 10 feet long. They stabbed the enemy's warhorse's sternum, abdomen, and eyes. However, the mobility of the cavalry was a headache for all troops. The spears could only hinder them for a while. Jiang Pengji was the first to notice the unusual movements in the rear, but she didn't show it. Instead, she focused on the situation at the front. In order to deal with the sneak attack, she gave Xiaofan a lot of manpower. Not only was Xiaofan's military ability questionable, but the quality of his own troops and the quality of his own troops were also questionable. When the news of the sneak attack came, everyone was shocked. Only Jiang Pengji was calm as usual. She said, "Believe in Yuan Gui." She had given the enemy a warning, which was equivalent to cheating. Jiang Pengji would definitely beat him up. Inexplicably, Xiaofan's little universe, desire, erupted. The enemy troops who launched the sneak attack were not bystanders. They were the people Feng Zhu had brought from the front lines of Wanzhou. Chapter 1333. Military Advisor. This, Feng Zhu said in a hoarse voice, Lu Shi is indeed a terrifying person. He rarely admired anyone, but Jiang Pengji, who had made his plans fail time and time again, was definitely one of them. Those who guarded the rear under such circumstances were either people who were cautious and cowardly, or people who had foresight. Jiang Pengji could not be the former, so it could only be the latter. She had long guessed that Feng Zhu would lead the troops to attack the rear. What should we do now? The general looked anxious. His tough and rugged face was full of worry, and fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. What should we do? Feng Zhu said, "There's no turning back. Of course, we fight." Should he order the army to retreat because the enemy was on guard? The general looked embarrassed, as if he had realized that he had asked a stupid question. Little did he know that Feng Zhu was in a difficult position. The troops he led to attack Jiang Pengji's rear and coordinate with the front line would more or less boost the morale of Huang Song's main force. If he withdrew his troops to avoid the enemy's vanguard, the morale of the front line would inevitably collapse, and they would be like stray dogs. Therefore, even if he had to fight to the death, he could not take a step back. The matter of Jiang Pengji's rear being attacked was not only heard by Jiang Pengji and the others, but also by Huang Song, who was overseeing the army in the middle. After thinking about it, Huang Song still could not guess the identity of the person until Qing Jing's words woke him up. "Lord, that must be Huijia's troops." Qing Jing counted the time with his fingers. The unfamiliar troops that attacked Jiang Pengji's rear must have been led by Feng Zhu. There was no one else but him. Huang Song was delighted. He quickly ordered his men to continue beating the drums to boost the morale of the soldiers. The drumbeats fell like a rainstorm. Before Jiang Pengji could move, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a bullet screen. Her fingers trembled, and her perfect expression almost revealed a flaw. Xiankutiangxia, beating the drums on the battlefield. This is the same principle as playing dynamic music on a sports bike. Is it to stimulate the adrenaline? Tudu Feichio, to the previous poster, "You're so naughty. How do you expect me to look directly at the background music of a sports bike?" War drums indeed had the effect of stimulating morale, but it had another important meaning, which was to convey orders and warnings. Soldiers fighting was not like TV dramas. Everyone knew martial arts, and fighting was as fancy as dancing. They only knew the simplest movements. Without martial arts, they were not afraid. With so many of them working together to attack at the same time, their lethality was not weaker than that of a martial arts master. According to the different drum beats, they attacked together, defended together, and chased after the enemy together. After all, this was an era without mobile phones, wireless Bluetooth, or even electronic loudspeakers. Huang Song gave the order to attack, and the drummers increased their tempo and frequency, oppressing the enemy with their momentum. If they could break through the enemy's line of defense in one go and inflict heavy casualties on the enemy, the morale of the soldiers would continue to rise. The soldiers under Jiang Pengji's command also noticed the changes in the rear. The frontline soldiers were timid for a moment. Before they could react, the enemy had already pounced on them like wolves and tigers. Perhaps the injuries on his body were not fatal, but the enemy's stomp was enough to turn him into a bloody pulp. Seeing the situation, Jiang Pengji immediately changed her tactics and adopted a defensive formation to defend against the enemy. The morale on Huang Song's side was not stable. As long as Feng Zhu's army could not break through the rear, and the frontline soldiers could not defeat the enemy, the morale of Huang Song's army would definitely plummet over time. When the time came, Jiang Pengji would give the order to switch from defense to offense and destroy the enemy's psychological defense in one fell swoop. She was calm and unhurried, issuing military orders one after another. Sure enough, Huang Song's side could not gain any advantage. On the other side, Xie Zhe's side had also stabilized the situation. Not only did he not allow the enemy to advance any further, but he also forced them to retreat a little. Today's battle is of utmost importance. Xie Zhe shouted loudly. "I will live and die with you all." As he spoke, he took the lead and killed 2 enemies. The surrounding soldiers were greatly encouraged. Xie Zhe's martial arts skills were comparable to Li Yun's. Both of them gave it their all, but the odds of winning were 50-50. The long spear in his hand was like a part of his body. Under his control, a silver dragon-like light flashed in the air, piercing through flesh like lightning and taking away a few lives in an instant. After killing a few people, Xie Zhe gave several more orders in succession. The two sides were in a stalemate. It seemed that they were evenly matched, but Feng Ju knew very well that as time went on, he would be the one who would lose. The army had set off from the front line of Wanzhou. Even though they had rested and reorganized halfway, the soldiers' bodies and spirits had not fully recovered. The enemy was different. Feng Ju was thinking of countermeasures, but how could the battlefield be controlled by the wisdom of one or two people? Jiang Pengji observed the situation and suddenly said, "Bogeo is about to lose." Looking at the situation on the battlefield, she did not have much of an advantage. Even if Huang Song was going to lose, it was impossible for him to lose so quickly. At the same time, Yang Si crossed his arms, twirled his neatly trimmed beard, and said, "Huang Song's momentum is lost." Han Yu nodded. Why were the three of them so sure? Because they had all heard that there was a problem with the rhythm of the enemy's drums. The pitch, rhythm, and density of the drum beats all represented different meanings. Beating the drums to advance the troops, and stopping when the drums sounded. The enemy's drumbeats were clearly for an attack, but the enemy had the intention to retreat. This was a clear sign that their morale had plummeted. Apart from that, the drummers' morale was low and they were distracted, so much so that the war drums made a few mistakes. This was fatal on the battlefield. Jiang Pengji saw that the timing was just right. She struck while the iron was hot and gave the order to attack. For a moment, the army pounced on the enemy like a dam that had been opened. The war drums also became louder and more intense. With one side rising and the other falling, Huang Song's troops were even more disadvantaged. Huang Song's face was livid. He clenched his molars tightly, and the blue veins on his forehead bulged. At that moment, a general who was covered in blood rushed over on horseback. He had suffered serious injuries and almost fell off when he dismounted. "My lord, our front line has fallen." Huang Song closed his eyes tightly and said through gritted teeth, "Retreat! Retreat!" As soon as the order to retreat was issued, the soldiers who heard it hurriedly turned around and retreated. All of them only wanted to escape, which made it easy for the enemy who was chasing after them. Jiang Pengji's side pressed on with a spurt of energy and pursued the enemy. The number of corpses left behind by the enemy's retreat was almost equal to the previous losses. The front line won a great victory. Feng Ju, who was in the rear, was also affected and quickly fell into a disadvantageous position. Jiang Pengji's gaze was distant. Her left hand gently stroked the hilt of the god-slaying saber at her waist. After a while, she said, "Summon Captain Jiang. Mobilize 5,000 troops and horses and follow me." When Yang Si heard this, his nerves tightened with a clang. Han Yu was a little slow to react. His lord was going to, "My lord, don't chase a cornered enemy." Yang Si widened his eyes and squeezed out the words that even he himself did not believe. "Take advantage of their weakness and kill them." Jiang Pengji sneered. "I only know how to beat a drowning enemy." When Jiang Nongqin received the news, she mobilized 5,000 elite cavalrymen without hesitation. No matter whether the Lord's orders were right or wrong, they were golden rules to her. Chapter 1334. They thought they could finally be at ease. Who knew that their lord was such a worrisome person? Han Yu said, "Are we short of 5,000 soldiers and horses? Why don't we bring more?" If it were not forbidden, Han Yu really wanted to bring all the troops to ensure his lord's safety. Jiang Pengji said, "Why do we need so many people? If 5,000 soldiers can't take down Bogeo, why should I keep them and waste our food? If 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers could not take down the defeated soldiers who had lost their morale and were like stray dogs, Jiang Pengji really wanted to scold them as useless snacks." Although her words were harsh, no one could refute what Jiang Pengji said because she had the right to say so. "Nongqin, let's go." Jiang Pengji waved her horsewhip. Little White took the lead and rushed out. Jiang Nongqin rode her horse and followed closely behind. 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers followed. Looking at his lord's back, Yang Si almost suffocated. He raised his hand and kept rubbing his left chest. With such a lord, his life would be shortened. Han Yu's face darkened. He caught a glimpse of Yang Si's action and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why didn't I know you were ill?" Yang Si said, "Since I followed such a lord, I'm worried that I'll fall ill." Han Yu was strangely silent for a few seconds. He could understand what Yang Si meant and felt the same way. Without comparison, there would be no harm. He thought of his former lord, Su Bei. Although he was not as versatile as his lord, at least he was less worrisome. The two of them did not have time to chat. Although Huang Song's side had retreated in defeat, they had not dealt with the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind. Although Xie Zhe did not have a strong desire for fame and fortune, as a military general, who would dislike having too much glory bestowed upon him, Xie Zhe was no exception. If they could completely defeat the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind, it would be a great achievement. Feng Zhu saw that the situation was hopeless and began to retreat in an orderly manner. However, the soldiers had lost their morale. One by one, they were like headless flies, throwing away their armor and running for their lives. The negative emotions were contagious. First, it affected a group of people, then it spread to thousands of people. Feng Zhu saw this and his face turned ashen. He almost fell off the horse. Fortunately, he was supported by someone. Otherwise, he would have been injured or killed if he had fallen from such a high horse in such a chaotic situation. "Military advisor, this general will escort you out of here." Feng Zhu woke up from the discomfort of the spinning world. His lips were dry and peeled, and he looked particularly haggard. "You don't have to worry about me. It's more important to gather the troops and retreat. As long as the green hills last, one need not worry about firewood. If they missed the best opportunity, they would be completely annihilated." Just as they were talking, a deafening battle cry came from behind them. Even though they had been fighting for several hours and the soldiers were exhausted, the enemies in front of them were all meritorious. With meritorious service, they would be able to earn high rewards. No matter how tired their bodies were, their minds were still active and excited. "Oh no, military advisor, the enemy is here." As they fled, the number of soldiers around them grew fewer and fewer. The soldiers who were left behind were either hacked to death or captured alive. General left the battlefield with nearly 1,000 of his trusted subordinates and Feng Zhu, but Xie Zhe seemed to have eaten a weight and was determined to chase after them. After a round of pursuit and encirclement, there were only 100 or 200 soldiers left. Most of them were injured and had almost no combat power left. The enemy was still following closely behind. The night was getting darker and darker. A cold wind blew, bringing with it the strong smell of blood. It was so strong that it was nauseating. The battle cry was so faint that it seemed to be drifting from the horizon. Feng Zhu stared at the enemy soldiers who surrounded them with a fierce look. Xie Zhe was riding a tall horse. The two sides were more than 10 feet apart. The soldiers surrounded them and tied their hands behind their backs. They even put swords to their necks. Xie Zhe glanced around and was satisfied. He raised his hand and waved. "Take all of them back and wait for my lord to deal with them." Feng Zhu tried to struggle, but the soldiers who restrained him were so strong that he couldn't move at all. There were different levels of captives. The soldiers who sold their physical strength were at the bottom of the pyramid. The value they produced was not enough for them to eat. Feng Zhu belonged to the top of the pyramid. Xie Zhe wanted to bring rare talents to his lord, regardless of whether they could pledge allegiance to her or not. To prevent Feng Zhu from having thoughts of suicide, he even sent people to watch over him. Feng Zhu snorted sarcastically. At the same time, Jiang Pengji led 5,000 troops to chase after Huang Song. Although it was said to be a chase, it was actually a slaughter. Many enemy soldiers tried to stop them, but they died under the horses' hooves. Their corpses were trampled into minced meat. Wherever the cavalry passed, piles of corpses were left. The darkness of the night was a good cover, but it didn't pose any obstacle to Jiang Pengji. Therefore, the time she took to catch up with Huang Song was much shorter than what he had expected. Facing 5,000 light and heavy cavalry, Huang Song only felt calm. Instead, he felt like, it's finally here. Originally, there were 30,000 to 50,000 remaining soldiers to cover his escape, but the soldiers were already scared out of their wits by the enemy. How could they still have the will to fight? Under the onslaught of the enemy's pursuers, some fled, some got lost, and some fell apart. When Huang Song was besieged, there were less than 3,000 soldiers around him. 3,000 crippled soldiers against 5,000 elite cavalrymen. The result was obvious. This could be considered a one-sided slaughter. When Huang Song and the others were captured, the outcome was finally decided. Jiang Pengji swung the blood-stained god-slaying knife in her hand. The blood left a long mark on the ground. She called out loudly, "Is that Bogeo in front?" Hearing how Jiang Pengji addressed him, Huang Song, who was in dire straits, laughed bitterly. "Lanting, are you still willing to call me that? In this chaotic world, you and I have no choice." "But business is business, personal is personal," Jiang Pengji said. "Don't you still call me Lanting?" "Yes. I have no choice." Huang Song looked dispirited. "But business is business. Lanting, have you thought about how to deal with me?" Jiang Pengji didn't say it explicitly. It wasn't a good place to talk about it. She said faintly, "I'm not a heartless person who kills indiscriminately. Back then, I chose this path because the situation forced me to. People weren't ambitious from the beginning." Huang Song was no different. Before the destruction of Dongqing, his ambition was to be an honest and capable official. He wanted to change the prejudice of others and bring prosperity to the country. However, this hotbed of troubled times gave him unprecedented ambition. Now that he had fallen from the peak to the bottom, he had to bow down to his former opponent. Most importantly, after submitting, he would be suspected for the rest of his life. Who would be willing to live such a life? Huang Song had considered the worst-case scenario. He would kill himself to protect his wife and children. But, every time he thought of what his wife, Qi Chaolan, said that day, the courage to kill himself receded like the tide. He said, "Lanting, you've really given me a difficult problem." Chapter 1335. The night breeze blew, adding to the indescribable loneliness. Huang Song was silent for a long time, as if he was considering the truth of Jiang Pengji's words. "It's getting late. If we don't go back soon, I'm afraid Zixiao and the rest will get sick from anxiety." Jiang Pengji tilted her head and said to Jiang Nongqin, "Bogeo is my close friend. His status is not comparable to that of an ordinary person. Instruct your subordinates to be careful and not to neglect the distinguished guest." Jiang Nongqin had no objections. She accepted the order and said, "I will obey your orders." Although Huang Song was a captive, Jiang Pengji did not have any intention to kill him. Naturally, she would not deliberately humiliate him. If he was sensible, why not spare his life? If he would rather break than bend, she could only kill him. She and Huang Song were indeed friends, but feelings were a supplement and not a necessity for her. If she had to give it up, she would not be sentimental. Huang Song did not say anything, but he did not resist either. He tacitly agreed to Jiang Pengji's arrangements. Compared to his calmness and indifference, the reactions of the others were more intense. Some cried hysterically, some were like dead water, and all their hopes were dashed. Some were trembling with fear. When the soldiers wanted to tie him up with ropes, his body shook like a sieve. Despair shrouded them like dark clouds. No one knew where their future lay. According to the rules of the past, if the lord of a force was defeated and captured, most of the officials under her would not have a good ending. Some could still jump ship and change bosses. Some would forever be suspected and suppressed because they had a close relationship with their old masters. They would be depressed for the rest of their lives. Jiang Pengji did not think so much. She only knew that the battle between her and Huang Song had finally come to an end. All that was left was to deal with the aftermath and recover Haozhou. It would not take much time. After thinking about it carefully, she felt that the pressure on her shoulders had lightened. She even had the leisure to chat and laugh with Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Nongqin did not dare to keep pace with her lord. She maintained a respectful posture. Even when riding a horse, she lagged behind her by half a horse's body. Jiang Pengji said, "You have made such a great contribution this time. What do you want, Nongqin?" Jiang Nongqin said without hesitation, "It's my honor to go through fire and water for you, my lord. How can I claim credit and ask for rewards?" It was reasonable for her to give up her life for the lord. Jiang Nongqin did not lack anything. The lord had given her a chance to perform meritorious deeds, which was already considered a gift. Jiang Pengji sighed. "I know you are loyal to me, but you have to think about yourself." Jiang Nongqin said matter-of-factly, "I'm very good." She felt that her current life couldn't be any better. Her lord had given her a second life and allowed her to live a life that she had never dared to imagine before. Occasionally, when she thought back to the past, she was a little surprised. Was the me before the age of 13 really her? She grew faster than her peers and had a bigger appetite. Because of this, her parents treated her harshly and scolded her. Her grandmother regarded her as a jinx and repeatedly bullied her. At the worst, she broke a pole that was as thick as an arm. After that, her so-called relatives sold her to a broker in exchange for a meager amount of money. He entered the Lu residence by chance, but because he looked more mature, he was humiliated by the steward's son. She had long been ready to die. The Lord had given her the meaning and courage to live, allowing her to enter a level that most people in the world could not reach. In her heart, the lowly servant Ah Zhu had long died. The one who survived was the Lord's Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Pengji was very stingy with her feelings, but Jiang Nongqin was one of the special cases. "I heard that you and Jing Rong," Jiang Pengji was not a professional iceman, but every pair of mandarin ducks that had been brought together by her was a model couple. Jiang Nongqin's expression was calm. Not a trace of shyness could be seen. She was calm as if she was talking about the weather. "What's wrong with military advisor Yang? I remember that Nongqin is only a year and a few months older than me." Jiang Pengji said, "The war will stop for a while. Don't you want to take advantage of the gap to settle the matter between you and Jing Rong? His peers have given birth to a few children, but he is still alone." Jiang Nongqin frowned and her tone was a little unfriendly. Of course, this unfriendly tone was directed at Yang Si. Could it be that military advisor Yang said something in front of the Lord? If not, why would the Lord suddenly urge them to get married? Jiang Pengji said, "No, I just dislike his old age. If the two of you don't hurry up, it will affect the children more or less." Jiang Nongqin said, "Will it?" Jiang Pengji said, "Jing Rong was addicted to alcohol when he was young, and his private lifestyle was tsk, he is old, so it will naturally affect him." Jiang Shaowei had never doubted the Lord's words. "I will consider this matter carefully." Thinking of the children of the Golden Scale Academy, Jiang Nongqin's mind started to work. They were all the pillars of the Lord's future. Thinking of this, she did not seem to be very resistant to this matter. Jiang Pengji said, "If Nongqin gets married, I will prepare a wedding dowry for you that will definitely not be worse than those of the princes and their grandchildren." Marriage in ancient times was particular about matching families. The economic strength and social status of the man and the woman would not be too far apart. Therefore, the betrothal gifts and dowries of both parties were mostly equal. If one party was more powerful than the other, and the man's betrothal gift was less, others would criticize him for marrying into the family and claiming connections with the in-laws. If the woman's dowry was less, others would also criticize the woman's family for selling their daughter. If Jiang Pengji really wanted to prepare a wedding dowry for Jiang Nongqin, Yang Si would have to empty his family's pockets. Jiang Nongqin revealed a faint smile, her eyes overflowing with happiness. Yang Si was speechless. I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. Jiang Pengji spent an hour before returning. Everyone was already looking forward to it, their necks stretched out. Hearing the movements of the army returning, they hurriedly went forward. Their first reaction was to look for Jiang Pengji. He looked left and right and saw that his lord was unscathed. Only then did his little heart return to its original place. Jiang Pengji said, "Bogeo and the rest entertain them well. Everything will be discussed tomorrow." Yes. Yang Si deliberately lagged a few steps behind so that he could walk side by side with Jiang Nongqin. The latter was frowning, as if she was thinking about a huge problem. Jiang Nongqin said, "For the next few days, military advisor Yang should abstain from alcohol and food. You should learn more about health from military advisor Wei." Yang Si asked. Why? He did not know what Jiang Nongqin's temperament was like in the past, but after the two of them got to know each other, he realized that this woman was more reticent than anyone else. She rarely spoke so much at once, especially when she was concerned about his health. He was flattered by the sudden concern. Jiang Nongqin said, "Military advisor Yang, do you have any plans for having children?" Yang Si said, "I haven't thought about it." In the past, he was an unmarried dink. He did not even have a wife, so where would he get a child? Jiang Nongqin said, "I hope that he will be a promising successor. If he can't be brought up, it's better to get rid of him early so that he won't tarnish the family's reputation." Yang Si was speechless. With such a mother, the child would have to open his eyes wide and weigh his own worth before reincarnating. Chapter 1336. Jiang Nongqin was different from ordinary women. Although the two of them communicated their thoughts, Yang Si felt that there was still a gap between them. She took the initiative to bring up the topic. Yang Si felt that he had finally written the first line. The rest was much simpler. However, the two of them were not emotional people. They talked more about official matters. He asked curiously, "Where did the Lord capture Huang Song?" Jiang Nongqin said, "It doesn't matter where. No matter where he is, he can't escape from the Lord's palm." Yang Si had a certain immunity to such die-hard comments. He automatically ignored them. Did he have any extreme reactions when he was captured? Jiang Nongqin said, "He's like a turtle in a jar. What's the use of resisting? The Lord treats him well. If he doesn't appreciate it, he'll die." Yang Si was speechless. His heart disease was going to act up again. Apart from a small number of people who were separated in the chaos, most of the mainstays under Huang Song's command were captured and became Jiang Pengji's prisoners. The latter did not have the habit of abusing captives, but she would not treat defeated people as distinguished guests. Apart from Huang Song, who was treated well, the other people's conditions were very ordinary. The food supply was the same as that of ordinary soldiers. Some people flew into a rage and knocked over their food. Some people ate in silence. Qing Jing was detained alone, so Wei Ci easily found him. When he saw Qing Jing, Wei Ci was carrying a food box in his hand. There were a few plates of hot dishes and freshly made white rice on the top of the box. At the bottom was a set of clean clothes that he had never worn before. Wei Ci did not expect to see Qing Jing again. According to the trajectory of his previous life, the latter would commit suicide in prison. On second thought, the friendship between Qingjing and Huang Song was not as deep as it was in his previous life. Naturally, he would not commit suicide for his master. Qingjing was locked in a small tent. There were many soldiers guarding outside. He could not escape even if he had wings. "Why are you here?" Qingjing put down his bowl and chopsticks. He raised his head to look at Wei Xi and said with understanding, "Did you become a lobbyist?" It was dark inside the tent. There was only a dim oil lamp on the low table. It made Qingjing look even more haggard and wretched. Wei Xi did not say anything. He bent down to take a few candles and kindling from the bottom of the food box and lit them up one by one. Only then did the tent become much brighter. "My lord did not instruct me on this," Wei Xi said straightforwardly. "I'm just worried that my senior brother will be neglected, so I came over to take a look." Under the candlelight, Wei Xi saw that Qingjing's chin had green stubble and his eyes were bloodshot. Where was his usual elegant demeanor? Qingjing did not get angry. He would not be surprised if Wei Xi was really a lobbyist. "You rarely call me senior brother Jing." Wei Xi was considered Master Yuanjing's last disciple. The seniority of the disciples did not depend on their age, but on the time they joined the sect. After all, we're from the same sect. Whether you call him senior brother or Yumo, isn't it still the same person? Wei Xi took a seat opposite Qingjing and took out the dishes from the food box. The aroma of the food assailed their nostrils and made their thumbs twitch. Even though Qingjing didn't have much of an appetite right now, when he smelled the aroma of food, he faintly felt hungry. The corners of Qingjing's mouth twitched as he forced a smile. "Zixiao wants to use this to bribe people?" Wei Xi said as he took out 2 jars of wine. "Today, we won't talk about official matters. We'll just reminisce about the past." Qingjing's temperament was different from his other brothers. Wei Xi wasn't confident that he could convince him to join the Lord. Wei Xi might not believe it, but this time, he was really here to take care of senior brother Qingjing. There was one thing that Wei Xi didn't understand in his previous and current lives. Why did Qingjing follow Huang Song? Wasn't his Dao to follow the will of heaven and support the orthodox? Whether it was in terms of family background or personal charm, Huang Song was worlds apart from the word orthodox. Wei Xi asked without hesitation. Qingjing took a sip of wine. This wine was very different from what he usually drank. The taste was more mellow, and there was a burning sensation as it flowed down his throat. The after-effect was quite strong. After drinking a few cups, his face turned red. His eyes were watery and he was also a little sleepy. "Zixiao, do you know the origin of the lords? Bogeo's ancestors?" Wei Xi was stunned. "Isn't this person from the Yuanshi family?" Qingjing said, "Bogeo's branch is the only surviving descendant of the Xia royal family. In the last years of the Xia kingdom, the royal family was almost wiped out. Our ancestors were grateful for the great ancestors' promotion, so they risked their lives to escort the last emperor's young daughter to escape. They hid in a branch of the family and carefully took care of her as she grew up. However, no one told her her identity. Our ancestors also treated her as their own daughter. At that time, the world was divided into 5 countries. If her identity was revealed, not only would it harm her, it would also implicate the Qing family." Wei Xi suddenly understood something. In that case, the last emperor's concubine married into the Yuanshi family? Qingjing nodded, confirming Wei Xi's words. At that time, the Yuanshi family was still considered a prominent martial family. The Qing family married the concubine into this family in order to better protect this bloodline. Who would have thought that the ancestors of the Yuanshi family would make mistakes one after another, and in just 2 generations, they fell into such dire straits? Huang Song's grandfather committed a crime and almost implicated the three families. It was only with the help of the Cheng family that the matter was settled. The death penalty could be forgiven, but punishment was inevitable. Huang Song's father was exiled and died halfway through. The orphan and widowed mother had no one to rely on, and the Yuancher family refused to take care of them. Huang Song's mother could only rely on her embroidery skills to earn money to support the family. When Huang Song's mother was widowed, she was still very young. By chance, she caught the eye of the Dongqing Emperor's favorite chamberlain, Huang Tan, and he came to ask for her hand in marriage. Huang Song's mother remarried, and Huang Song's father changed his surname to Huang Tan's stepson. Huang Song naturally followed his father's surname. Not many people knew about this old past, even Huang Song himself did not know. Of course, Qing Jing assisted him partly because of their bloodline, but also because Huang Song had his merits. If he could restore the glory of his ancestors, that would be the best. Senior brother, tell me about this. Wei Ci was a little puzzled. According to the normal scenario, if the Lord knew that Huang Song had this relationship, Huang Song's life would be in danger. Qing Jing said, the remaining power of the Xia kingdom has long been gone. Whether Bogeo has royal blood or not, does it matter? Moreover, there were only a few people who knew about this matter, and most of them were dying. Who would believe that the grandson of a eunuch in the eyes of outsiders was actually the last descendant of the previous dynasty's royal family? Senior brother also said that the Xia kingdom no longer exists. Do you still insist that they are the legitimate ones? Wei Ci asked. Qing Jing smiled and said, that depends on whether the Duke of Lanting that you serve can become the legitimate one. When others heard this, they would probably think that Qing Jing had the intention to pledge allegiance, but Wei Ci knew very well that he was determined not to pledge allegiance. Unless the Lord can really ascend to the throne. Wei Ci sighed and said, Senior brother, do you have the heart to waste your time and be an idler in the mountains? Qing Jing said, this is not a question of whether I have the heart or not. This is a question of whether the Duke of Lanting is willing to fulfill my wish. He did not have the initiative. Qing Jing was not against serving Jiang Pengji, but it was not the current her. Wei Ci said, Senior brother, don't you think it's a pity? What a waste of a good time. If the world was at peace, it would be extremely difficult for Qing Jing to be put in an important position. Would he really not be depressed in the future? Qing Jing said, there's Wei Ci, Yang Si, and Han Yu. Qing Jing is not missing. The Yuans under Huang Song were the only ones who were powerful. He had seen how much harm they had caused. If the Langya branch was completely powerful, would Jiang Pengji feel that she could not do anything alone? It was better to retreat in the face of the current and seek peace. It would not be too late to become an official after the world was at peace. Chapter 1337. Wei Ci got up and bade farewell. He stopped in front of the tent and said, I will not hide Huang Song's past from you, my lord. It was true that Qing Jing was Wei Ci's eldest senior brother, but Jiang Pengji was Wei Ci's lord and true love. There was a distinction between close and distant, and there was a distinction between public and private interests. It's fine. Qing Jing closed his eyes lightly. He was not surprised by Wei Ci's choice. It would be strange if Wei Ci helped Huang Song hide the truth. Countless thoughts flashed through Wei Ci's mind. The scenes of his previous life flashed past his eyes quickly, and finally turned into a sigh. In his previous life, he had been very curious as to why Huang Song, who was only the son of a eunuch, was favored by Qing Jing, and the Qing clan did not object. Unfortunately, they were not fated to be brothers. Wei Ci did not even make it to Qing Jing's funeral, much less seek Qing Jing to resolve his doubts. If Huang Song was a descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial family, everything would make sense. Wei Xiai hurriedly went to look for Jiang Pengji. She had just finished bathing and was dressed in moon-white pajamas with a large, warm cloak draped over her shoulders. Her long, jet-black hair was steaming and fragrant after a bath. When Wei Xiai walked over, she was sitting on the couch, wiping her wet hair with her body turned sideways. "What is it, Zixiao?" Jiang Pengji twisted the ends of her hair with a dry towel as she tilted her head and asked Wei Xiai. Under the illumination of the orange-yellow candlelight, Jiang Pengji's side profile seemed to have a gentle filter. The gentle color of her brows and eyes made Wei Xi's heart beat wildly. Wei Xiai pretended to be calm as he bowed with his hands clasped in front and greeted respectfully. Only then did he open his mouth to explain the purpose of his visit. His eyes were fixed on Jiang Pengji's hair. She looked at her wet hair, then at Wei Xiai, and handed him the cloth. Wei Xiai was stunned on the spot for a while. He went forward and half-knelt beside her. He raised his hand to take the towel from her hand and carefully wiped her wet hair. His movements were very gentle, as if every strand of hair was a treasure to him. In comparison, Jiang Pengji's movements were much rougher. "Just now, I went to visit senior brother Cheng Jing. During our conversation, I heard a piece of news. My lord should also listen to it." Jiang Pengji casually crossed her legs and rested her elbows on her knees. She looked relaxed. "News? What kind of news is so important that you have to come all the way here, and at this time? If it was not important news, why would Wei Xiai look for her at such an ambiguous time? Wasn't this sending the quack to the tiger's den?" Wei Xiai said, regarding Huang Song's past. Jiang Pengji frowned and asked in confusion, "Bogeo's past? Is there anything special about his background?" She didn't have any opinions about family status, but she also knew that Huang Song's family background was very criticized. Could it be that there was a twist in this? Wei Xiai said softly, "On the surface, Huang Song is the step-grandson of Dongqing's minister Huang Tan. He comes from the Yuan family, but there's more to it than meets the eye. According to his senior apprentice brother, Huang Song's ancestor was actually the Empress concubine of the last emperor of the Grand Xia Empire. Back then, the Xia kingdom was destroyed and the world was divided into 5 parts. The royal family was almost completely wiped out. Only the Qing clan's ancestor remembered old kindness and risked his life to bring the infant Empress concubine out of the palace, placing her in the Qing clan's branch family to raise. Many years later, this Empress concubine married into the Yuan clan. The branch emperor concubine belongs to his Huang Song's branch, so he is a descendant of the imperial family. Jiang Pengji said, "Why haven't I heard of this?" Wei Xiai combed her wet hair with his fingers and said, "Once the identity of being a descendant of the Xia kingdom's imperial family gets out, it will definitely lead to the destruction of the clan. It's reasonable for the Qing clan to keep it a secret. My senior brother assisted Huang Song. Huang Song's identity is also part of the reason." Jiang Pengji recalled Cheng Jing's temperament. Wei Xi's words were 90% true. However, Jiang Pengji said, "The founder of the Xia kingdom's imperial family was also of humble origin, right? Cheng Jing is so persistent about being a descendant of the Xia kingdom's imperial family? It doesn't make sense." In terms of background, Huang Song was also a distance away from being orthodox. Wei Xiai knew that some parts of his lord's history weren't very good, but he wasn't surprised. Instead, he considerately and attentively explained to her, "My lord, you may not know this, but although the founder of the Xia kingdom's imperial family was of humble origin, his ancestors were also illustrious and wealthy. According to the history of this time and space, the recent history included the chaotic times of the 16 kingdoms, the Xia kingdom, the 5 kingdoms, and the current chaotic times. Before the 16 kingdoms, the Central Plains had also been unified for 367 years, and it was called Beichen. The genealogy of the Xia kingdom's imperial family could be traced back to the Beichen royal family. The history of the Cheng clan's prosperity was also calculated from the period when Beichen was prosperous. Jiang Pengji listened carefully and laughed. I didn't expect Bogeo to have such an ancestor. Does he know about this? Wei Ci shook his head and said, most likely he doesn't know. If he knew, he would have used this to change the public's opinion. In an era that was particular about one's background, it was better to rely on one's ancestors. Even if one's ancestor had long passed away, he could still protect his descendants in public opinion. If Huang Song could be blessed with this huge halo, why would he have to bear the stigma of being the grandson of a eunuch for so many years? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, if I were Bogeo, even if I knew, I wouldn't say anything. Wei Ci asked, why? Jiang Pengji said, how could such an important card be revealed from the beginning? The world's evaluation of him is so unbearable. Even if he can dig out the genealogy to prove his identity, outsiders won't believe it. They will only believe in the facts that they have determined. Instead, they will slander Huang Song for using unscrupulous means to build up support and slander his ancestors. When he has a certain level of success and can look down on others, it will be better to reveal it. No matter how good the card was, it still depended on the timing. That was what he said, but Huang Song really did not know about this. Cheng Jing also planned to reveal it when the time was right. However, Cheng Jing could not wait for this opportunity. Jiang Pengji raised her hand and tucked her long hair behind her ear. A faint smile hung at the corner of her lips, as if she did not take Wei Ci's news to heart. Wei Ci asked, how do you plan to deal with Huang Song, my lord? Jiang Pengji said, he's a friend, after all. I don't plan to kill him. The decision of how to deal with him lies in his own hands. Do you mean to let him go, my lord? Wei Ci's hand paused. If you don't pull out the roots, my lord knows, there will be endless trouble in the future. Jiang Pengji played with her hair and said with a smile, naturally, I won't let him go so easily. There is no free lunch in this world. If he wants to protect the lives of himself and his family, he has to pay a price. I guarantee that he will not become a threat to me in the future. There was only one life. If it was gone, it would be gone. It all depended on whether Huang Song was willing to pay for it. A trace of doubt flashed in Wei Ci's eyes. He did not know what his lord had thought of. I plan to have a talk with Bogeo. If he agrees, what's wrong with me letting him go? If he doesn't agree, I will give him a dignified death for the sake of our friendship in the past. Jiang Pengji grabbed her half-dry hair. By the way, what's Cheng Jing's attitude? Wei Ci said vaguely, he supports the orthodoxy. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and asked in return, what if I become the orthodoxy? Wei Ci said, I'll be at your command, my lord. Chapter 1338. Jiang Pengji asked Wei Ci to help her dry her hair. She took out a green hair tie and tied her long, smooth hair behind her back. The attire greatly reduced her original sharpness, but instead added a touch of gentleness. She had the charm of a girl for the first time. Zixiao, are you curious about the method I used to solve Bogeo's problem? Wei Ci nodded honestly. He was indeed curious, but there were some things he couldn't ask too deeply. He could only bury his doubts in his heart. Zixiao, why don't you come with me? Jiang Pengji stood up and tidied the clothes draped over her shoulders. She said with a smile, if I go to see Bogeo like this and no one follows me, who knows what kind of scandals will happen outside. They did have scandals in the past, but no one took it seriously. Wei Ci lowered his eyes and didn't comment, but the curvature of his lips revealed his inner thoughts. Oh yes, remember to bring a set of brush, ink, and paper. Bring a few more sets of paper. Jiang Pengji leisurely walked in her wooden clogs to see Huang Song. Wei Ci followed closely. The patrolling soldiers stood and saluted when they saw the two of them. Bogeo shouldn't be asleep yet, right? Wei Ci said with a smile, once he becomes my lord's captive, I'm afraid he won't be able to sleep even if he has a big heart. Huang Song indeed hadn't fallen asleep. He tossed and turned over Jiang Pengji's words, how will you know if it's a difficult or easy question if you don't try? He wasn't sure what Jiang Pengji meant. It wasn't that he was stupid, he just didn't dare to believe it. What was the reason for letting him go? Was it because of the so-called youthful friendship? Such an excuse could only deceive ignorant people. In the face of conflicts of interest, all emotions had to give way to conflicts of interest. If Jiang Pengji was an emotional person, perhaps it would be somewhat believable. However, he was a rational person and wouldn't easily be swayed by his emotions. He thought about it and still felt that it was better to commit suicide. As long as he died, Jiang Pengji wouldn't be ruthless toward his former officials. At the same time, she would treat his family well. The wife and children shouldn't be implicated. A dignified lord wouldn't treat orphans and widows harshly for the sake of his reputation. Su Pei's family was the best example. Han Yu had also joined Jiang Pengji's camp. He would more or less take care of his former master's family and children. It might not be very glamorous, but at least they would be safe. Huang Song's current mood was somewhat similar to Jiang Pengji's in the past. Back then, she had been betrayed and slandered by her companions, and the Federation had secretly arrested her. Her first reaction was to resist arrest by force and chase after the real culprit single-handedly. As a soldier of the Federation, she naturally trusted it, but because of the conflict of interests, this trust had to be marked with a question mark. I knew you hadn't slept. After Jiang Pengji entered the tent, she happened to see Huang Song staring blankly at the saber on the table. She smiled without changing her expression. Behind her were Wei Ci and a few cooks from the logistics department. The cooks were carrying utensils for roasting meat and hot pot, as well as many ingredients. Huang Song looked up and was dumbfounded. What kind of stance is this? Jiang Pengji said, I'm looking for you for supper. I'm hungry. Huang Song, Jiang Pengji raised her hand and threw the sword to Wei Ci. She asked casually, Bogeo, is this sword expensive? This sword was given to me by my grandfather when he was crowned Emperor Song. Although it isn't precious, it holds great significance. Jiang Pengji said, so it was a gift from an elder? If the elder knew that the sword he gave you ended your life, he wouldn't feel good. As she spoke, the cooks tidied up the table and set up the roasting pan and cauldron. The ingredients were placed on a separate rack. Another person lit the cauldron and poured the seasoning that had been seasoned with good flavor. It's a pity that alcohol is forbidden in the army. Otherwise, we can have supper and drink at the same time. Jiang Pengji sat opposite Huang Song, while Wei Ci sat beside her and behind her. Lanting, why are you here? Huang Song didn't have the appetite to eat. He said directly, what's the matter? Why don't you tell me? Jiang Pengji moved her chopsticks and put the ingredients into the boiling pot. She smiled and said, when we're 60 years old, I wonder if we'll have the opportunity to have a meal together. Huang Song's expression changed. Lanting, what do you mean? I don't like to force things. You know my temperament, Jiang Pengji said. If you've made up your mind to die, I'll take care of your funeral properly based on our past friendship. If you still have the thought of living, I'm not a narrow-minded person who can't tolerate others. Huang Song knew her true attitude when she spoke so clearly. After a long time, for hidden dangers, it's best to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. You keep such a hidden danger. When did you become soft-hearted? Soft-hearted and reckless. When did you see me with such a thing? Jiang Pengji said, I'm willing to keep you. Naturally, I'm prepared. Let's make a pact. If you can agree to it, I'll naturally have the magnanimity to tolerate you. Jiang Pengji's solution was to make a pact with Huang Song. If he wanted his life, he would have to give up a certain amount of freedom and rights as the price. Huang Song was silent. I'm willing to swear an oath of blood with you. You don't have to worry that I'll betray you before the blood in my mouth dries. Huang Song's expression changed. He looked at Jiang Pengji with a complicated gaze. She was serious. It was the first time Huang Song recognized this point so clearly. In this era, everything was bad except for the high moral bottom line. They valued the spirit of the contract very much. After the oath was made, both parties would be bound. If one party took the lead in betraying the covenant, the moral level would be untenable. The other party could be ruthless and not be condemned by public opinion. To put it more clearly, both parties would sign a contract and abide by it. The contents of the contract would definitely favor Jiang Pengji. Huang Song would be the bound party. It was not enough to just have the oath. Jiang Pengji wanted everyone to know about the oath. Not only would it bind Huang Song, but it would also bind his former officials. It was not a big deal to let Huang Song live. She wanted Huang Song to live well so that his former officials would not dare to have a trace of disloyalty. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "If Bogeo is willing, we can discuss the contents of the oath while eating." Huang Song laughed bitterly and said, "Lanting's thoughts are really, very meticulous." Jiang Pengji turned her head and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Zixiao to help me write." Wei Si agreed. The contents of the contract favored Jiang Pengji, but it was not unacceptable to Huang Song. It was even more lenient than expected. Huang Song's third generation would not be able to control real power, but his great-grandchildren could enter officialdom through normal channels. Huang Song himself would be conferred a title in the future, and his title would be inherited for 3 generations. Losing power and a certain amount of freedom in exchange for peace and wealth for the rest of his life. For the defeated, this was a good ending. It was much better than Su Pei's family, who had lost the protection of the head of the family and lived in fear. Huang Song carefully looked at the dozen pages of the contract that Wei Si had drafted and asked a question. Children and grandchildren can't enter officialdom. What about daughters? Jiang Pengji said, "If your daughter is capable, she can." Based on the current trend, men had far more political rights than women. Therefore, Jiang Pengji restricted Huang Song in his third generation. After all, they were old friends. She did not want Huang Song's family, who had no real power, to be looked down upon. Therefore, she left some leeway. As long as Huang Song's daughter and granddaughter entered officialdom, his former officials who did not believe in him would not support them on account of their past relationship. Therefore, this group of people could not say anything about women entering officialdom. Wei Si was speechless. Chapter 1339. Jiang Pengji ate her fill and got up to leave with Wei Si. She realized that Wei Si had been silent since the beginning. He was still holding a pile of contracts in his arms, as if he was thinking deeply about something. Jiang Pengji suddenly stopped. Wei Si did not stop in time and bumped into her. She did not react, but Wei Si did not stabilize his center of gravity and took 2 steps back. He came to his senses and quickly bowed to apologize. Jiang Pengji asked him, "What are you thinking about, Zixiao?" Wei Si would hide it from others, but he would not hide it from the person in front of him. As long as she asked, he would tell her everything he knew. He said, "I'm thinking about my lord's intentions." Jiang Pengji tilted her head and looked at him. She chuckled and said, "What intentions could I have?" Wei Si analyzed, "My lord and Huang Song made a blood pact. On the surface, this pact is not binding Huang Song, but my lord. Huang Song had already been defeated. If the lord wanted him to live or die, how could Huang Song, the loser, resist? Not only did Jiang Pengji keep Huang Song alive, but she also wanted to make a blood pact with him. Huang Song lost his power and certain freedom, but he and his family no longer had any worries. As long as his family behaved themselves, no one could touch Huang Song's family, be it the Lord or the future Lord. A mere pact could protect the lives of Huang Song's 3 generations. When his great-grandchildren were born and grew up, it would be 50 or 60 years later. 50 or 60 years was neither long nor short. The world would change. Who knew what would happen in the future? Anyone with a discerning eye could see that this pact was not only not a bad thing for Huang Song, but it was also a great thing. However, Wei Ci smelled something different. Huang Song's words, children and grandchildren can't become officials, but what about daughters, inspired him. The idle members of the royal family had no power. Their lives were worse than those of ordinary aristocrats, not to mention that Huang Song and Jiang Pengji had fought for the throne. Without power and being unable to become an official, what was the use of being a noble? In order to keep the family name, Huang Song's descendants had to expend energy to train their daughters and even granddaughters to help them enter the official career. Huang Song's old officials would not stop them for the sake of their past friendship and immediate benefits. Instead, they would push them from behind. 50 or 60 years was enough for the power structure of the court to change dramatically. When the Empress ascended the throne, she could use force to overcome the chaos. After peace, the officials still hoped for a male heir to inherit the throne. The risk of a woman giving birth was too great. No one could guarantee that a woman giving birth would not be dangerous. To the officials, male heirs did not have the burden of pregnancy. Their chances of survival were higher, and they were more effective in stabilizing the court. In addition, women's status in the imperial court was too low. This was also one of the problems that hindered the succession system of the Empress. Wei Ci guessed with a trembling heart. Was his lord paving the way for the future crown princess? Back then, when the crown princess was conferred and the previous inheritance mechanism was overturned, His Majesty, Wei Ci, was under a lot of pressure. Had he already made arrangements in this life? At the thought of his daughter from his past life, Wei Ci could not help but feel his eyes welling up. Although the emperor had resisted the pressure to make the crown princess, the officials had never stopped questioning Jiang Yan. She could only shut those people up if she did it flawlessly. One could imagine what kind of pressure this successor had to bear from birth to adulthood. Wei Ci was lost in thought. If his lord were to pave the way for her now, the pressure Yan would have to endure in the future, would it be less? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "I'm not willing to suffer any losses. I gave Bogeo some benefits so that he could repay me more." Wei Ci was more certain of his guess after hearing it. "My lord, you mean?" Wei Ci almost bit his tongue. He could not pronounce his words clearly. "You want," Jiang Pengji said, "I heard you talk about her." Wei Ci was surprised. "When Han Mei and Wan got married, you were drunk. You even warned Feng Yu from Zisher's family not to harm Yan Is that child called Jiang Yan?" Wei Ci's heart was thumping wildly. He could not remember this at all. Jiang Pengji laughed to herself. Her hearing was amazing. How could Wei Ci's small movements escape her ears? She had a daughter called Jiang Yan. Feng Zhen had a child called Feng Yu who was her lover. She was quite satisfied with this spoiler. Wei Ci admitted, "Yes, her name is Jiang Yan." Jiang Pengji said, "She must be a very outstanding child. She looks like my lord, but her temperament is not the same. Yan's temperament is more reserved and deep. She was able to give lectures when she was only 10 years old." Even Wei Ci could not understand his daughter's thoughts. As the only heir to the new dynasty, other than herself, no one could imagine how much pressure she carried on her shoulders. Wei Ci could only accompany her in her studies as much as possible and teach her knowledge. Every time I see the Grand Tutor, I always feel very comfortable. I don't like those who only know how to drop books. They have never been emperors before. How would they know what an emperor should do? They only know how to read from the books. I've memorized all of them. This was what Jiang Yan said when she was 4 years old. It was also a rare willful statement from her. She usually did things very steadily. In comparison, Wei Tsong was more like a child. When Wei Ci realized that Jiang Yan had reached adulthood, he vaguely realized that the child had grown into a different person. She was the most qualified heir. Reserved and deep? Jiang Pengji said, she looks more like you. She knew very well what kind of temper she had, but her future daughter had a calm personality. Wei Ci said, my lord, are you paving the way for Yen, this time? The past life is different from this one. If we have a child in the future, we don't know if it will be Yen, Jiang Pengji said calmly. However, some things have to be prepared as soon as possible. Whether it's Yen, or not, she's still our daughter. Huang Song's family prepared it for her. For this reason, I can tolerate Bogeo. She was not only interested in Huang Song, but also Huang Song's connections and old ministers. If she operated them well, they would definitely be of help. Since she knew the difficulties that she might face in the future, she could make arrangements early so that she would bear less pressure in the future. Wei Ci said, parents love their children, so they have far-reaching plans. Jiang Pengji smiled and winked. Our relationship is still clean. There are still 7 long years before we become parents. Zixiao, don't make me wait too long. Wei Ci was speechless. She always flirted with him. His lord's style was really different from her previous life. Jiang Pengji said, other than Jiang Yan, we have other children? Wei Ci was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, I have a son named Wei Kong. His courtesy name is Tingzhang. Hearing the surnames and names of the 2 children, Jiang Pengji understood the meaning behind it. She did not probe further. Instead, she returned to her tent. According to her observation, the 2 children were probably the wounds in Wei Ci's heart. This matter should be discussed later. The next day, Jiang Pengji gathered everyone and told them about her and Huang Song's blood oath. Everyone frowned slightly. They all agreed to eliminate Huang Song, but it was not impossible for their lord to keep Huang Song. Chapter 1340. The crowd did not understand Jiang Pengji's future as well as Wei Ci. Naturally, they did not see the hidden scheme in it. However, based on the contents of the alliance, their lord did not suffer any losses. Under this premise, as long as Huang Song kept his promise, it would not be a problem to spare his life. Jiang Pengji asked, does anyone have a different opinion? No one had any objections. If there was, it was mostly because they felt that the ban on the 3rd generation was too short. The 3 generations referred to Huang Song, Huang Song's sons, and Huang Song's grandsons. That guy had already married and had children. His children were already a few years old. It seemed that it would only take a few years for his great-grandchildren to grow up. Everyone was worried that the time was too short. However, calculating the time, by the time Huang Song's great-grandchildren became officials, he would have long been buried. His former officials would not be left. Thinking about it this way, it was acceptable to ban the 3rd generation from becoming officials. The Lord allowed Huang Song to live, but she would not let him and his descendants be unable to become officials forever. This was not showing mercy, but deliberately finding fault. Jiang Pengji saw that the young princesses were so reasonable and felt satisfied. She then ordered people to prepare for the alliance ceremony. She had formed alliances with people many times, but most of them were verbal agreements. An alliance made with blood was different. The audience in the streaming room thought that this kind of alliance was like dripping blood into a wine cup and drinking it. In reality, it was smearing the blood of livestock on the lips to show sincerity and determination to form an alliance. For a TV series, the former was naturally more expressive. Jiang Pengji turned off the streaming earlier yesterday, so the idle audience did not know the details of her and Huang Song having supper and talking about the alliance. When they first arrived in the streaming room that day, they were shocked by the development of the story. Many of them even expressed doubt and worry about it. Xiaofan, streamer, you broke the agreement and pretended to be an official, right? Can you guarantee that Huang Song's descendants will not secretly stir up trouble? In ancient novels, the character of Huang Song's descendants was the proper male lead. The ancestors and the royal family failed to fight for the world. In order to appease the people, the royal family pretended to be benevolent and righteous. The descendants had no choice but to yield to reality. In the male lead's generation, he was the most outstanding existence. He was even envied and hated by the cruel and tyrannical emperor. He was always on guard against suppressing the male lead. The male and female protagonists fell in love while laying low, conserving their strength. After a series of struggles, they overthrew the royal family and replaced them. The audience was tired of watching this kind of plot and couldn't help but worry that Huang Song's descendants would make trouble. It was better to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Goo 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 goo, although it's not good to kill the innocent, you have to think about yourself and your descendants. It's dangerous to keep Huang Song alive. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, it's very serious to swear an oath with blood. Both parties will not break the contract easily, let alone sign a paper contract. For a more recent example, during the Long March, a certain marshal also used the method of blood oath to make an agreement with the ethnic minorities not to offend each other. Although ancient times were backward in all aspects, their spirit of contract was very worthy of praise. If it was just a verbal agreement, they would have to rely on their own morals to fulfill the agreement. Naturally, there would be more people who would break the agreement. However, Jiang Pengji put all the terms into practice. While they pledged their alliance by drinking blood, there was an additional procedure to sign the alliance contract. It was written in black and white, and the alliance was the proof. Who would take the initiative to break the agreement? Han Yu and Cheng Jing, as the MCs of both parties, checked the two agreements separately to make sure that there was no difference between the content of the alliance contract and the agreed terms. After the check, Han Yu read it aloud to let the officials and soldiers who witnessed the alliance contract know what was written in it. If there are no objections, you and I will sign it. Huang Song sighed. Of course not. He picked up the pen and dipped it in red ink. He signed his name at the end of the agreement and stamped it with his private seal. That was not enough. They also needed to leave their handprints on the agreement. Jiang Pengji pulled out a dagger and cut her palm with a poker face. She clenched her fist and blood covered her entire palm. Huang Song saw that she was so bold, so he silently gave up the delicate action of using the ink pad. But he had no sharp weapon with him, so he could only borrow her dagger. There were two copies of the alliance contract. One was kept by Jiang Pengji and the other by Huang Song. Jiang Pengji dipped her finger in the bowl filled with animal blood and wiped the blood on her lips. Huang Song did the same. She said happily, "The alliance contract has been signed. It seems that it is not impossible for us to have dinner together when we are 60 years old." Huang Song thought that he had a long life, but the person in front of him might not. However, if he dared to say that out loud, the people behind Jiang Pengji would definitely beat him to death. Under the supervision of his desire to live, Huang Song could only swallow the words in his heart silently. The alliance contract was signed, but it was not over so easily. Huang Song couldn't help but sigh when he thought of Cheng Jing and the others. He had failed to live up to their high hopes and expectations. "My lord, why did it have to be like this? Yuan Chang's wounds were treated, but because of his action, the gauze was stained with blood again. He didn't care about it at all and continued, "It was all because of my incompetence that I failed to protect my lord, so my lord," thinking of his lord's experience, Yuan Chong was so sad that his eyes turned red. If it wasn't for his incompetence, how could his lord fall into the hands of Lu Shi? Huang Song hurriedly interrupted Yuan Chong and raised his hand to help him up. There were many generals in the Yuan family. Although each of them had their own thoughts, there was no lack of sincere and loyal people. Huang Song only felt that he owed Yuan Chong, but Yuan Chong did not owe him. "Heng Shu, why do you say that?" Huang Song laughed bitterly. The more Yuan Chong behaved this way, the more he felt guilty and sad. As his lord, he owed everyone too much. He was afraid that he could not repay them in this lifetime. After much persuasion, Yuan Chong was finally appeased, but the sorrowful atmosphere only increased. Everyone looked as if they had lost their parents. Huang Song and Feng Ju looked at each other from a distance. The latter's expression was gloomy and cold. "Has my lord thought about what to do in the future?" one of the strategists asked Huang Song. His voice was a little hoarse. Huang Song said, "Lanting is a person who keeps her promises. Since she swore an oath with blood, she won't break it easily. I'm not worried about myself. Instead, I'm more worried about you. You're all in the prime of your lives. You can't just retire and waste your talents, can you?" For an ambitious person, wasting time was the cruelest punishment. Huang Song was not a sore loser. He did not mind the old officials pledging allegiance to Jiangpengji. As the saying went, parents could remarry, not to mention the ruler and the officials. When everyone heard this, they felt even sadder. Some people even burst into tears. Huang Song was not completely selfless. He had his own plans. Because the covenant stipulated that the male heirs of the third generation of Huang Song were not allowed to become officials, he could only think of ways to train his daughter. If the old officials pledged allegiance to Jiangpengji, they would be his daughter's natural support in the court in the future. Huang Song's childhood experience told him that reputation and everything else were fake. Only strength could earn people's respect. Jiangpengji would grant him a title of nobility for 3 generations in the future, but it was an empty title without power. If others were willing to respect you, it meant that they thought highly of you. If they were not willing to respect you, you could only accept it. As the head of the family, Huang Song naturally could not let his family face such a predicament. Therefore, he had to plan slowly now. Chapter 1341. Qingjing was not the only one under Huang Song who was unwilling to surrender. Jiangpengji would not mind anything but having more people she could use. Huang Song's old officials were unwilling to surrender. She would suffer a great loss. This plan was not only to pave the way for her future daughter, but also to let Huang Song persuade these people to surrender. It was not difficult to persuade others to surrender. The only difficulty was Qingjing and Feng Ju. Needless to say, there were only 2 reasons why Qingjing was unwilling to surrender. First, the time was not ripe. Second, Jiangpengji's Langjia county was too powerful. If he was included, Yuanjing would have 3 of his 4 disciples. He did not want to cause trouble for his teacher and junior brothers. Even if Jiangpengji was not a person who liked to be suspicious, it was difficult to guarantee that others would not feel a sense of crisis. If Wei Ci were here, he would also agree with Qingjing's idea. Wasn't Wei Ci like that in his previous life? Even if he had no intention of rebelling, even if his original intention of supporting the descendants of the Wei family was for Her Majesty, the Wei family's restlessness aroused the suspicion and vigilance of Qiguan Rang and the others. Once the meteorite fell from the sky, Wei Ci almost lost his life. The Wei family was also completely suppressed. Even if they were in the same power, there would be discordant voices within. If one faction's influence was allowed to expand, the other factions would naturally feel a sense of crisis and urgency. This was also the beginning of internal discord. People always had selfishness and preferences. It was not that there were no people who truly served the public wholeheartedly without distractions, but there were too few. Even these people were not absolutely obedient. They would loyally eradicate what they thought was a threat. Cheng Jing tactfully expressed his worries. Naturally, Huang Song could not force him. Then, why was Feng Zhu unwilling to surrender? In the face of Huang Song's tactful inquiry, Feng Zhu was silent for a long time. He said faintly, "There's no other reason. I'm tired of it." Feng Zhu said it lightly, but Huang Song felt that he had another meaning. However, Feng Zhu was unwilling to say it clearly, so Huang Song could not force him. He sighed. "If you're tired of it, you can become a hermit and live a carefree life." No matter what, Feng Zhu was the third Langjun of the Feng family. As long as he did not deliberately seek death, Jiang Pengji would not touch him for Feng Jin's sake. From this point of view, Feng Zhu was the safest among them. He could advance and retreat at will, so Huang Song did not have to worry too much. He and Feng Zhu had known each other since they were young, so he had slowly come to understand the other's character. Feng Zhu might look easygoing on the outside, but in reality, he was extremely arrogant. This kind of arrogance did not mean that he was arrogant. Instead, it was the way he handled things. Because Feng Zhu learned and did everything easily, he gradually developed a personality that could not tolerate failure. Feng Zhu had suffered quite a blow from this huge defeat. Huang Song also hoped that he could calm down for some time. Feng Zhu said, "Has my lord really given up?" Huang Song was stunned, and he suddenly recalled the conversation between the two of them all those years ago. "What if I lose? If the lord loses, I will accompany the lord to fight the Azura hell again. There won't be another Lu Lanting there." When he thought of this, Huang Song's face suddenly flushed red, and he was almost too embarrassed to show his face. Feng Zhu was not a person who cherished his life. He did not care about the lives of others, nor did he care about his own life. In the end, however, Huang Song signed an alliance with Jiang Pengji. He paid the price of not being able to become an official for 3 generations. He sacrificed his freedom in exchange for a night of promiscuity. Feng Zhu must be very disappointed at this moment, right? Huang Song was not a person who was afraid of death, but he could not open his mouth to defend himself. Similarly, he could not explain his current actions. "Huijia," Huang Song spoke embarrassedly. He did not dare to meet Feng Zhu's eyes at all. Feng Zhu asked again, "Has my lord really given up?" This time, his tone was more serious than before. "Huijia, it's not that I've completely given up, but is there a need to continue fighting in this situation? The winner is king, and the loser is the bandit. A loss is a loss. I, Huang Bogeo, am not a person who cannot afford to lose," Huang Song said awkwardly. "You and I have known each other for many years. How can you not know my ambition? If Lu Lanting can really pacify the world and end this chaotic world, so what if I submit to her?" If it were not for the fact that he was in a dead end, Huang Song would not have admitted defeat so easily. However, the outcome had been decided, and he did not want to fight anymore. Hearing this, Feng Zhu's eyes darkened, and there was another period of silence. After a while, he said, "In the end, it's all my fault." Huang Song was dumbfounded. He thought that Feng Zhu would reprimand him, but he did not expect the topic to change and put the blame on him. What did this mean? Feng Zhu refused to explain. That year, the Dongqing royal family moved the capital to Qinzhou, and Huang Song had a stage to show his skills. Although it was Yang Si who schemed against Huang Song and caused him to lose the trust of the Dongqing emperor, Feng Ju also added fuel to the fire. Huang Song's ambition could be said to have been raised by Feng Ju. He only cared about himself and forgot what Huang Song's original goal was. Feng Ju did not give Huang Song a chance to ask. He bowed and said, "I have made up my mind. My lord, please take care of yourself in the future." Huang Song could not tell what he was feeling in his heart. He only felt powerless and sad. His movements quickly reached Jiang Pengji's ears. She also knew the choices of the people. Those who were willing to submit, she would only accept them after an assessment. Those who were not willing to submit. Cheng Jing and Feng Ju really don't know what's good for them, a general muttered in a low voice, feeling indignant for Jiang Pengji. As soon as he finished speaking, he was glared at by a few people. He was so scared that he did not dare to make a sound. The people who glared at him were not bystanders. They were Wei Ci, Yang Si, and Han Yu. They were the big shots of the advisors. How could the newly promoted small general dare to offend them? The three of them were considered Cheng Jing's senior and junior brothers. Feng Ju was Feng Jin's third brother. It was not easy to deal with any of them. Jiang Pengji rubbed her brows and said, "Leave Cheng Jing to Master Yuan Jing. Feng Ju will return a favor to the Feng family." She was responsible for the children she had taught. Jiang Pengji did not want to kill the two boys and offend Yuan Jing and Feng Ren. After all, she still needed them to help her perfect her education. As long as Cheng Jing and Feng Ju did not betray her, Jiang Pengji could let them go. Anyway, Cheng Jing had gone to Yuan Jing's side. It was impossible for him to be idle. When Feng Ju returned to the Feng family would keep an eye on him and not cause trouble for her. Everyone said, "My lord is benevolent." The counselor could still find out what she was thinking. If others were a little slower, they would almost put her on the pedestal of benevolence. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Look, it was obvious that she was full of evil tricks. She was scheming from afar, but outsiders still thought that she was pure and righteous. She did not care about Huang Song's matters for now. Jiang Pengji was extremely busy. Previously, Huang Song's army was defeated. There were countless casualties, but there were even more deserters. If she left them alone, they would either starve to death or become bandits and harm the people. Jiang Pengji naturally had to deal with the aftermath. On one hand, she sent troops to capture them. On the other hand, she recruited troops and horses to trick them into coming back. Jiang Pengji had the most experience in dealing with these defeated troops. Chapter 1342. Jiang Pengji ran the army strictly, but the salary and pension benefits given to the soldiers were second to none among the feudal lords. She spent half a month dealing with this matter. In her free time, she would bring people out to survey the terrain of Changye to see if there were any areas that could be improved. Not only did she go alone, but she also brought Huang Song along. They are all busy. No matter how I think about it, only you are free. Jiang Pengji said calmly. She looked as if she was just talking about the weather. Huang Song was so angry that he was about to bleed. 20 days ago, he was still an opponent whom he had fought to the death with. Have you forgotten? Was he being scolded for being a freeloader? Jiang Pengji was wearing a loose robe with large sleeves. Her long sleeves were tied up with a bracelet, revealing her bare arms. Now that it was almost late autumn, Huang Song felt cold just by looking at her clothes. He couldn't wait to stay away from her. Jiang Pengji was wearing wide-toothed wooden clogs. Huang Song followed beside her. Behind her stood more than 20 guards with swords. They climbed to the top of a nearby hill, and looking down, they could see a continuous line of regular barracks. Right now, Changye is a desolate place. However, I heard that it used to be a county with abundant grain production. Jiang Pengji took a glance and ignored the guard's fearful gazes. She climbed onto the rock at the top of the mountain and stood higher to see further. Does Bogeo know about this? Huang Song's scalp went numb when he saw her suicidal actions. He immediately backed away to clear his name. He didn't want to be misunderstood as trying to murder Jiang Pengji. He reckoned that they would pounce on him and kill him before he could do it. I've heard a little about it. It's said that the rainwater flowed backwards and caused the plague, Jiang Pengji said. The terrain here is low. If there is a rare rainstorm and the waterway is blocked, it will be easy for the river to flow backwards. The natural disasters in Dongqing were endless. Droughts and floods died. No one could guarantee that Changye would not experience a rare rainstorm again. If this place was to be developed, this problem had to be solved. If Changye could be managed well, it would become a major grain-producing county in the future. There was no such thing as too much grain. In this era, it was a blessing for farmers to suffer from cheap grain prices. The scariest thing was that there was not enough grain to eat. Huang Song glanced at her and asked, "What does Lanting plan to do?" Jiang Pengji said, "Divert the river water to nourish the fertility." Because the ancient tools were very backward, in order to make up for this, they had to send a lot of manpower and labor. According to the previous methods, Jiang Pengji recruited refugees from the vicinity and provided relief through work. Not only could it solve the security problems of the area, but it could also solve the livelihood problems of the people. At the same time, it would not delay the construction of various projects. Naturally, he would do the same to Changye. However, Changye was a desolate and uninhabited place. Not to mention refugees, it was hard to even see a living person. If she wanted to develop the area, Jiang Pengji would have to transfer manpower from other places. This would be another expense, and it would take time to transfer people. I'm planning to sort out the uniforms. They were prisoners of war, but weren't they Huang Song's former troops? Jiang Pengji planned to absorb the young and strong prisoners of war to expand the military camp. The rest would be left behind as labor. Of course, even if they were prisoners of war, Jiang Pengji planned to pay them, but the pay was only half that of normal labor. Once the construction was over, these captives could either stay and become residents of Changye, or they could choose to return home. Huang Song said, "Lanting can make the decision." In his opinion, Jiang Pengji's methods were gentle and merciful. If it was in the past, when food was scarce, the prisoners of war would be killed. Prisoners of war could not be considered human beings. Their social status was lower than that of slaves. If Jiang Pengji disliked their gluttony, she could kill them here to save money. Not only would they be kept alive, but they would also be paid to work. They would even have the opportunity to regain their status as civilians in the future. Even Huang Song could not find fault with it. Jiang Pengji stayed on the mountain and watched the scenery for a while. Then, she got up and jumped off the huge rock. "Let's go back. It's getting dark." Everyone went down the mountain and returned. Just as they were halfway up the mountain, Huang Song accidentally stepped on something and almost rolled down. Jiang Pengji quickly pulled him up. Huang Song was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. "Why did you step on nothing?" "There's something under my feet." Huang Song stepped aside and found a piece of blackened bone exposed where he had stepped on. Jiang Pengji did not care at first. When she looked down, she found a piece of green on the ground near the black bone. She got up and said to the guard, "Dig it out." The guard dug very deep. It took him a quarter of an hour to dig the headless corpse out of the mud. There was a seal next to the corpse. Jiang Pengji did not care about the corpse. She cared about the seal. Huang Song glanced at it and said, "This seal is of excellent quality. Looking at the carving and style, it seems to be from the early Xia dynasty." The Xia dynasty unified the Central Plains. The surrounding small country succumbed to it. It was an era with an extremely prosperous economy and a luxurious atmosphere. This atmosphere also affected all walks of life. Many places carried the decadent atmosphere unique to that era. Even the seal that was commonly used by Taoists was more or less affected. Jiang Pengji said, the early Xia dynasty. Taoism was popular at that time. This seal came from the same source as the one that Wei Ci carried. Except for the different seal characters, it seemed to be cloned. Huang Song said, although it's not the state religion, it's much more likable than Buddhist monks. Buddhism was an imported religion. It was not a local religion. When monks were at their most domineering, they almost shook the foundation of the entire society. When Buddhism was first introduced, it was not acclimatized. After it gained a firm foothold, it was unstoppable. In order to avoid taxes and avoid military service, the people shaved their heads and became monks. Even though they became monks, their behavior was no different from that of ordinary people. In order to build temples, they occupied millions of hectares of fertile land. Most importantly, they did not pay taxes. They kept a large number of monk soldiers and used countless copper, iron, gold, and silver to build Buddha bodies. This seriously affected society. The period of the 16 Kingdoms was also the most prosperous and darkest period of Buddhism. After the establishment of the Xia dynasty, the founder of the Xia dynasty, under Prime Minister Huangfu's suggestion, exterminated Buddhism. He destroyed countless temples, confiscated millions of hectares of fertile land that was illegally occupied by the temples, confiscated hundreds of thousands of slaves, and ordered the illegal monks and nuns to return to secular life. In addition, he dismantled the bronze and golden Buddha statues. The materials were used to cast coins, farm tools, and weapons. He established strict rules to become a monk. After this battle, Buddhism declined, and Taoism rose rapidly with the support of the court. Of course, there were people among the people who said that Prime Minister Huangfu was a disciple of a Taoist temple in name when he was young, so he was especially close to Taoism. After Huang Song's explanation, not only did Jiang Pengji understand, but salted fish in the streaming room also understood. Tudu Feiqiu, it sounds like the three martial arts sect destroyed Buddhism. The Fairy Queen's crimson, I thought monks were kind and benevolent. I'm dumbfounded. Zimu, the monks in the history of China were similar. Chapter 1343. The headless skeleton was poisoned to death. Huang Song sighed. Sigh, this brother is quite pitiful. Although it was unknown how many years had passed, one could still see the dark color on the bones. Even though he didn't know who the owner of the skeleton was, it was still quite a tragic ending. Jiang Pengji glanced at the skeleton. This skeleton is quite old. In short, it was not a corpse from this era. Looking at the seal on his hand, the owner of the corpse was probably from the great Xia dynasty. Should we dig a hole and bury it? He died such a pitiful death. If even his corpse was abandoned in the wild, it would be too tragic. Jiang Pengji nodded. The guards dug a hole and buried the bones in the ground. Huang Song looked at Jiang Pengji in astonishment and asked hesitantly, this seal, how should we deal with it? It was best not to touch a dead person's belongings. Who knew what kind of dirty things were on them? Jiang Pengji said, Zixiao has a similar seal with him. I'll let him take a look. Oh, Huang Song replied and did not continue to ask. The quality of the insight seal was very valuable. It would be a waste if he didn't take it. In any case, the owner wouldn't be able to settle the score with a living person. This could be considered a windfall. When they returned to the campsite, the sky was almost dark. Jiang Pengji turned off the streaming room and invited Huang Song to join her for dinner. Huang Song sighed. Losing to Lanting makes me even more convinced. Jiang Pengji said, eating won't stop you from talking. Huang Song shook his head. He used to hear that Jiang Pengji's meals were the same as the soldiers'. At that time, he thought it was impossible, but now he knew it was true. It was because of this that he felt so emotional. Most of Dongqing's land belonged to the north, and wheat cultivation flourished there. However, before the Great Xia dynasty, people didn't know that this thing could be ground into flour. Most of the time, it was steamed and eaten, and it was called wheat rice. Later, people discovered that wheat could be ground into flour and made into all kinds of pastries. Not only was he full, but the taste was also much better than the wheat rice from before. Even so, the agricultural technology was still immature. The cost of removing the bran from the wheat was too high, and the price rose accordingly. Ordinary people could not afford it at all. The processing of the wheat or other food that the common people ate was very rough. It was often mixed with gravel and small stones. To judge whether a person was born rich or poor, one could usually tell by looking at his teeth. Their teeth were neat and clean, which meant that they ate well and could even wash their teeth and rinse their mouths. Their living conditions were naturally rich. Their teeth were worn and uneven. Most of them came from poor families. The food they ate was not carefully processed, so there was more sand and stones. The soldiers' rations had been millet porridge or wheat rice before the 16 kingdoms, but now they were made from flour ground from wheat and made into pastries and rice porridge. The sesame seed biscuit and steamed bun placed in front of him looked very exquisite. There was no trace of sand or stones, and it was also fragrant, soft and delicious. As the Lord, it was normal for Jiang Pengji to eat more meticulously, but Huang Song saw that the ordinary soldiers ate the same way. What did this mean? This meant that the economy under Jiang Pengji's rule was very prosperous, agricultural tools were developed, and ordinary soldiers could also eat delicately. By seeing one spot, one can see the whole leopard. Huang Song was naturally convinced of his defeat. Unbeknownst to them, Jiang Pengji's improvement and invention of agricultural equipment were almost equivalent to that of war equipment. Every year, she allocated a large amount of funds. Xiao Guang and Zhang Ping of the woodworking workshop received such a generous salary. If they did not give her something good, she would beat the two of them to death. If Jiang Pengji made a trip back now, she would find that the agricultural equipment in Wanzhou had been improved again. Bai Yuexia had been taught by the Mahists, and she was extremely talented. When the three technological experts gathered together, it was like lightning striking the ground fire. Inspiration burst forth wave after wave. After dinner, Huang Song took the initiative to leave. Jiang Pengji lit an oil lamp and read the documents for 6 hours. When she put down the last scroll, she heard Wei Xi's footsteps. As expected, Wei Xi sent her supper again. If it were not for the fact that she could not gain weight from eating, she would have become a pig sooner or later. Zixiao, look at this. Jiang Pengji took out the seal that she had picked up earlier and handed it to Wei Xi. She took the bowl and chopsticks that Wei Xi handed to her. This is. Wei Xi's eyes widened in shock. He subconsciously raised his hand to touch his waist. The Dharmachakra seal that perfected Liuru had asked Master Liaochen to give him was still there. How could the Lord have a similar one? My lord, where did this Dharmachakra seal come from? Jiang Pengji explained the details in detail. When he heard that the seal had been picked up near an unknown headless corpse, Wei Xi understood everything. He said solemnly, I'm afraid that corpse has a great background. Jiang Pengji asked, what background? I'm afraid it's the remains of Prime Minister Huangfu of the previous dynasty. Wei Xi said hesitantly, I also have one here. This was given to me by Zhenren Liuru through Master Liaochen. According to Zhenren Liuru, the seal used to belong to a Taoist layman disciple. That disciple was Prime Minister Huangfu of the Xia dynasty. There was a pair of seals. One was passed down to Zhenren Liuru, and the other should have been buried with him. The seal was one of the tools that Taoists often used in religious ceremonies and ceremonies. It was a tool to make a living and was used to invite the gods. Zhenren Liuru had given Wei Ci one to suppress evil spirits. Now that another had appeared, he was getting more and more confused. Jiang Pengji said, "Why did that Zhenren give you this thing?" He could feel that the thing had a sense of righteousness. Because it was harmless, Jiang Pengji allowed Wei Ci to keep it close to him. Wei Ci shook his head. "I don't know." Jiang Pengji said, "If that's the case, you can take this seal too." She forced the seal into Wei Ci's hands. Wei Ci did not know whether to accept it or reject it. In the end, he could only accept it. After all, the seal was a burial object of the deceased. Wei Ci would not keep it close to him. He would keep it and put it on a memorial tablet to worship. Looking at Wei Ci's back as he left, Jiang Pengji's eyes looked dark and deep under the candlelight. The next day, Jiang Pengji received a battle report from Feng Jin. The messenger rushed over on a fast horse. He panted and said, "My lord, we have won a great victory in Haozhou." Jiang Pengji opened the battle report with a calm expression. Huang Song's army had been captured. Haozhou's defense was very weak. Feng Jin had gathered 100,000 troops and pointed them at Haozhou. It was only a matter of time before they conquered it. Not only did she not feel happy, but she felt that Feng Jin's efficiency was a little slow. He was 3 to 5 days later than she expected. She was a little happy when she read the battle report. If Bogeo appointed his wife as a general, it might be a different situation. Although she is a woman in the inner residence, her courage and insight are no less than that of an ordinary husband. It turned out that when Feng Jin led his troops and was about to conquer the entire territory of Haozhou, Huang Song's wife, Qi Chaolan, led the troops she raised, the remaining soldiers, and the people to defend the last city. Faced with the great disparity in military strength, Qi Chaolan also knew that it was inevitable that the city would be breached. Therefore, she let a group of martyrs commit suicide on the city wall to express their determination to die in glory rather than live in dishonor. Seeing this, Feng Jin stopped fighting for a few days and changed to besieging the city. Although the martyrs' suicide inspired the fighting spirit of the people in the city, Feng Jin besieged the city but did not attack. There was a serious shortage of food in the city. Feng Jin even ordered the soldiers to sing the names of dishes at the foot of the city every day to use food to sway the will of the guards. The two sides were in a stalemate for a few days. The people in the city could not bear the hunger. They gathered together and launched a riot. They forcibly broke through the city gate. Feng Jin led his troops and marched straight in, conquering the last territory of Haozhou. Qi Chaolan was captured. Chapter 1344. Long before Haozhou was conquered, the news of Huang Song's capture had spread. The news was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue for Qi Chaolan. Even though she was mentally prepared, she was still overwhelmed with grief. Her first reaction was not to follow Huang Song. Instead, she chose to take her child back to her parents' home and beg her parents and brothers to take care of her. In the end, her father, who loved her dearly, refused to see her. Her mother looked at her, wanting to say something but hesitating. Her brothers sighed and sent her off. Her mother said to her, "Your father said, the situation in Dongqing has been settled. Lu, she probably won't make things difficult for you and your child because of our past friendship." Qi Chaolan's eyes were dry. She said in an almost helpless tone, "If Bogeo dies, Lu, she won't make things difficult for you and your child, but their future is worrying. If father and mother are willing to take them in and raise them to become useful people, Bogeo's branch can also rise. If anything happened to Huang Song, as a woman in the inner house, she couldn't give her child the most comprehensive education. There would always be a male elder to supervise and guide them. She was also considered to be from a large family. The education within the family was comprehensive, so she wanted to entrust her child to someone outside the family for a few years. The reason why the gentry could maintain their pride for hundreds of years was because they controlled the educational privileges that ordinary people couldn't enjoy. Qi Chaolan didn't want her children to delay their enlightenment after Huang Song died. If they didn't become useful people, after 1 or 2 generations, Huang Song's branch would be completely destroyed. In addition, she was also worried that the chaos outside would hurt her child, so she wanted to hide in her parents' home. Unexpectedly, her mother looked conflicted and told her a cruel truth. "Daughter, you also know Lu Shi's attitude towards the gentry. In the past, our family had close contact with Bogeo. It's hard to guarantee that Lu Shi won't target our family because of this. It's not that your father doesn't love you, but he has to consider the family's future, so he can't take in Bogeo's child." No one knew what Jiang Pengji's attitude towards Huang Song was. According to the idea of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, Huang Song's children might not have a good ending. Even if they could survive, they would be overrated to death. The structure of the chaotic world was chaotic. Some people fought hard, some watched from the sidelines, and some carefully found a balance between the two. The Qi family that Qi Chaolan belonged to was a typical example. They wanted to enjoy the benefits that came with prosperity, but at the same time, they did not want to bear the corresponding risks. Back then, Qi Chaolan's father had taken a liking to Huang Song at first glance, feeling that this young man had a bright future. Coincidentally, Qi Chaolan had also taken a liking to Huang Song, so her open-minded father acted as a matchmaker for the two of them. In the next few years, Huang Song did not disappoint his father-in-law. He provided him with many conveniences both openly and secretly. Unexpectedly, his father even refused his own grandson and granddaughter at the door. "Chaolan," Qi said. "Bogeo's Chaolan and Qi Chaolan is Qi." Qi Chaolan was already exhausted and could no longer hold on. Tears welled up in her eyes as she said, "I'm only pleading with my parents to temporarily take them in. If Lu Shi really wants to vent his anger on me, I'll definitely bring the children back. I won't implicate my parents or my family." Even so, it still doesn't work. Although Qi Chaolan was the most pampered daughter in the family, her father was cold-hearted. A daughter that was married out was like water that was poured out. Qi Chaolan's father would not object if it was just to take in Qi Chaolan, but he would not agree to take in Huang Song's child. She didn't want to bring trouble to the family. Qi Chaolan's mother always listened to her husband. She was heartbroken by her daughter's complaints, but what could she do? "Lan, go back first. I'll try to persuade your father." This was just an excuse. After hearing this, Qi Chaolan completely gave up. She brought the 3 children back to the house in an ox cart. Children are very sensitive. The eldest and second son are only 1 year apart, but they have been in education for 3 years. They look more mature than normal children. "Mother, are we not going to see grandfather?" Every time the children came with their mother, they would see their kind grandfather and grandmother. But now, they only saw their grandmother. Qi Chaolan said gently, "Grandfather isn't feeling well. He doesn't want to pass his illness to you. You'll see him in the future." The 3 children were playing with the maids in the room when she talked to her mother, so they didn't know what happened. The second son said, "Mother, the doctor in the house is very skilled. Why don't we let him take a look at grandfather?" The 3 girls were only 3 years old. They were quiet and cute. They looked at their mother and 2 brothers with their black pearl-like eyes. She asked in a childish voice, "Is grandfather sick?" Qi Chaolan's tears, which had just stopped, threatened to burst again. If they didn't have children, she would want to live and die with Huang Song. But with children, she didn't dare to do so. Losing their father meant losing their protection. If they lost their mother, they could only live under someone else's roof and suffer. Chi Chaolan pulled herself together and let the 3,000 troops that she kept join the defense. She wasn't good at the art of war, but she was better than ordinary people. Unfortunately, the situation was hopeless. Her struggles were futile. Jiang Pengji passed the battle report to Huang Song. Huang Song was so anxious that he couldn't even speak properly. He bit his tongue several times. "How's the wife?" Jiang Pengji said, "Huayu is a careful and reliable person. He won't hurt your wife and children. They're very safe." Huang Song was still worried. As a man, he held the battle report with reddened eyes. He looked very sad and aggrieved. Jiang Pengji didn't react, but the audience in the streaming room couldn't take it anymore. Midnight eating yellow peach, sob, sob, sob. I suddenly like Huang Song. Eat full. It seems that Huang Song and his wife have a good relationship. It's rare for an ancient man to be like that. Have strength to lose weight. I think that Huang Song's wife played a great role in pledging allegiance instead of committing suicide. Jiang Pengji comforted him. "Since you're so worried, I'll arrange for you to go to Wanzhou as soon as possible." "Your wife will be sent there too?" Huang Song asked, "What about you?" Jiang Pengji said, "There are too many things to do in Hu County, Haozhou, and Chenzhou. I might not be able to go back before the new year." If the people who worked overtime heard this, they would probably be celebrating. They could finally have a good new year. Of course, Han Yu and the others wouldn't be happy if they heard this. Jiang Pengji had come up with a plan on how to govern Changye. It was up to Han Yu and the others to put it into action. "My lord, the accounts are ready." Han Yu handed a thick booklet to Jiang Pengji. To govern Changye, not only did they need people, but they also needed to make a good budget. For example, how much food could the laborers eat in a day, how much they would be subsidized in a month, how much they would be subsidized in a month, and how much they would be subsidized in clothes and fabrics. After all, it was almost winter. They couldn't just let them work in rags. Apart from these, Han Yu also calculated the daily work progress of so many people and finally calculated the expenses needed for the whole governance process. The more detailed the accounts were, the more they could use every cent in the right way to prevent shoddy work, corruption, and favoritism. Chapter 1345. The war outside was in full swing, but the people in the rear were generally not affected much. In order to increase employment opportunities and reduce the damage caused by the unemployed in the country to public security, Jiang Pengji spent money to build more than a dozen official roads after careful study. Workers were provided with 2 free meals a day, and a certain amount of copper money was given according to the amount of work they did. A bolt of linen would be subsidized for 4 seasons of the year. If the workers could complete the construction of the entire road ahead of time, the participating workers could receive an additional 10 days of rewards. Not only could these official roads facilitate the deployment of troops during wartime, but they could also benefit the people in peacetime. For example, the people could transport their excess fruits and vegetables to other places to sell, increasing their additional income. In the past, it would take 10 days to half a month just to walk the mountain roads. By the time the farmers arrived at their destination with their fruits and vegetables, the goods would have long rotted away. Now, it only took 1 day to arrive, and the fruits and vegetables were fresh. Jiang Pengji also encouraged women to work outside to support their families. In addition to physical labor such as building roads, she would also provide other jobs that were more suitable for women. Improving the status of women in society was not something that could be achieved in a short period of time. It would take a long time to reverse the stereotype. For example, she knew that some women were paid more for embroidery and weaving at home than their husbands who worked outside. However, the income of these women could only be described as supporting the family rather than supporting the family. Not only did others not feel that there was anything wrong with it, but even the women themselves felt that they were not the ones who supported the family. It had become the norm to take the initiative to put oneself in a weak position. However, with Jiang Pengji's strong rise, this natural atmosphere was being reversed. It was a good phenomenon after all. There were occasional disturbances along the way, but everything was moving in the direction she had expected. When the convoy escorting Huang Song and the others passed through the border of Wanzhou, everyone felt that the murderous atmosphere in the air gradually faded. It was replaced by a calm and peaceful atmosphere. Huang Song's anxious heart also slowly calmed down, and he began to carefully observe the scenery along the way. Huang Song was sitting in the carriage, reading with his head lowered. He heard the sound of an old ox, and a strange smell drifted in. He frowned slightly and lifted the curtain to look outside. He saw a couple following an old ox, one on the left and the other on the right. On the back of the old ox sat a girl in blue and white clothes. She carried a slanted bag on her shoulder. Huang Song thought they were parents and daughter, but when he listened carefully, he realized he was wrong. This man was a hunter from a village in Wanzhou. His childhood friend had been conscripted into the army and died on the battlefield 2 years ago. His childhood friend's wife became a widow. A widow with a little daughter who was less than 4 years old in the village was not easy to live. The man often helped her. After a while, the two of them fell in love with each other, and then they became husband and wife under Iceman's persuasion. The man also treated his childhood friend's daughter as his own flesh and blood. A while ago, he received news that his childhood friend's orphan had been selected to study at the Golden Scale Academy. The man was so happy that he couldn't sleep for a few days. As a matter of fact, the couple was preparing to send their daughter to the academy. Although she was a girl, those who had the opportunity to study in this era were all talented people. No matter how bad it was still better than selling physical labor. Everyone said that he was blessed. He raised this adopted daughter with all his heart, so he didn't have to worry that she wouldn't take care of him when he was old. He felt that it made sense. When he had his own children in the future, his children could also use his sister's book to learn a few words. Outsiders did not have such benefits. Huang Song had also heard of the Golden Scale Academy, but he hadn't paid much attention to it in recent years. He only knew that it was a private school for initiation. Now that he saw it, he felt that he was wrong. Huang Song lifted the curtain of the carriage and asked the man with a smile, "Big brother, are you going to the market?" When the man heard someone calling him, he turned his head and looked for a long time. Seeing that Huang Song's convoy was heavily guarded, he was so scared that his face turned pale. He said with trepidation, "No, we're sending our child to school." Huang Song asked them to come closer and talk. The couple were both ordinary people, so how would they dare to disobey? Sending your child to school? Huang Song glanced at the girl riding on the cow's back. She was nervously clasping the bag of her sling bag, her bright black eyes wide open. She wasn't considered cute, but she had the unique vigor of a child. It's not easy to go to school these days. It's expensive. The man tried to relax, and the guards guarding the carriage automatically made some space for the man to come closer. Our prefecture overseer is raising her, so it doesn't cost much. The man shook his head and said, "Sending her to school is also good to eat." The official in charge of selecting the children said that the children's meals, drinks, and accommodations were all free in the academy. They would even make clothes for free throughout the year. Huang Song pretended to be surprised and said, "Is there really such a good thing in the world?" The man said, "Of course there is. The girl from the family at the entrance of our village has already been in school for 3 years. Huang Song asked a few more questions in detail, and the man answered enthusiastically. Some of his answers were clear, while others were vague. After all, he was an illiterate hunter from the countryside. It was good enough that he could express what he knew in a simple manner. Huang Song changed the topic and asked a question that caught the man off guard. Based on what Big Brother has said, could it be that someone is heartless and deliberately let their own child take the place of going to school? It wasn't impossible for such a thing to happen. Some parents would very likely take the place of their relatives' orphans for the sake of their own children. The man was stunned and said angrily, "Which heartless person would dare to do that?" Huang Song smiled and said, "Everything is possible. Regarding this problem, does the prefecture overseer have any preventive measures? Since it was a pension, these benefits should really be implemented on the orphans of the martyrs. Otherwise, it would be very ugly if it was exposed." The man hurriedly waved his hands and said, "This won't happen. Who would dare to do this? Aren't they afraid of being haunted by ghosts?" Huang Song had doubts in his heart, but it was a pity that the man in front of him didn't know much and couldn't dispel his doubts. He didn't know that Jiang Pengji had never seen a person's heart as beautiful. When she first formulated these pension benefits, she had already considered all the aspects that could be considered. The military camp would send people to visit each family regularly. If the family that adopted the orphans showed signs of mistreating the children, not only would the family be severely punished, but the abused children would also be sent to a special place to be raised. Every child was recorded so that it would be convenient for the Golden Scale Academy to select children of suitable age. Outsiders couldn't fake it even if they wanted to. Despite the huge amount of work involved, Jiang Pengji felt that these things were necessary. At noon, the sun rose high in the sky. The group finally arrived in Xiangyang district. As soon as they entered the city, the couple led the old cow to ask for directions. When the people saw the children on the cow's back wearing clothes, they immediately gave them directions enthusiastically. The chief who was in charge of escorting them said, "Are you going home directly?" There were only 3 people escorting them this time. One was Huang Song, the other was Cheng Jing, and the last was Feng Ju. They happened to be packed and transported to Wanzhou. Chapter 1346. Jiang Pengji simply waved her hand and let them return to their respective homes and find their mothers. Whichever family trained such a troublemaker would be punished. This was the safest method without offending anyone. Therefore, Huang Song returned home to reunite with his wife and daughter, Feng Ju was sent to Feng Ren's residence, and Cheng Jing temporarily stayed at his master's residence. Huang Song raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What return home?" The head of the count said, "I just received news that your wife has settled down in the city with a few Langjun and maidens." Huang Song's heart finally relaxed when he heard this. He couldn't help but reveal a relieved smile. "Okay, I'll go back now." When Huang Song arrived in Xiangyang district, Qi Chaolan had already stayed there with her children for 7 or 8 days. When she knew that her husband was not dead and would arrive to meet her in a few days, she almost burst into tears. Qi Chaolan waited for her husband to return happily since he was out of danger. But, when Huang Song arrived at his new home and the old housekeeper led him in, he found that his wife and children were not at home. "Where did they go, madam?" The old housekeeper said. Madam was worried about the 2 young Langjuan studies, so she used her connections to look for a teacher. Who knew that she couldn't find a decent teacher in such a big Xiangyang district? Later, she found out that Master Yuanjing and the other scholars were teaching at the Golden Scale Academy, so she brought Langjun and his wife to participate in the entrance examination. Huang Song came in not long after Qi Chaolan left. The couple missed their long-awaited reunion. Huang Song said with difficulty, "Send them to the entrance examination." The old housekeeper said, "The Golden Scale Academy announced last year that they wanted to expand the number of students. In addition to the original fixed quota, they added an additional 50 places. As long as they are of the right age, they have the opportunity to enroll. To be fair, these students have to go through the examination. The original students of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers. Every year, 200 students were enrolled. This year, the conditions were relaxed and there were an additional 50 places. For these 50 places, a group of children competed fiercely, as if they were going to be evaluated. Huang Song frowned and said, "Lanting is really muddle-headed. How can you set this precedent at this time?" Except for a few second generations, Fengyi and others, the students of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers. If there were other children with strong backgrounds or resources, wouldn't the gap between the students be widened? It was completely conceivable that the gap between the students would widen, and the atmosphere in the academy would definitely not be as good as before. Little did they know that Jiang Pengji, the fox, would never make a losing deal. She was willing to set the precedent because she wanted to bait them. If Huang Song knew the background of the students who were admitted, he would more or less understand Jiang Pengji's thoughts. Of the 50 spots, only 20 were obtained through their own abilities. The other 30 were mostly from wealthy merchant families and were so poor that they only had money left. Among the scholars, farmers, merchants, the social status of merchants was the lowest. Even if they brought a lot of money to invite a teacher, the teacher they invited would only be an ordinary scholar. The truly famous scholars would not even bother to deal with merchants. Not to mention inviting them with money, he didn't even have the qualifications to enter their door. Jiang Pengji operated in the dark. She had her own plans. In the words of the live stream viewers, it was to attract investment. Give those tycoons a little benefit, then reveal their true colors, and let them willingly fork out money to invest in the Golden Scale Academy's branch. How could they make a nouveau riche pay? Give them what they wanted the most. The merchants were rich, but they had no power, no influence, and no reputation. However, as long as Jiang Pengji spread the news and told them that the merchants who invested in the branch could hang the title of the honorary dean in the academy after the branch was completed, the officials would even come forward to commend them and give them a plaque. There were many people who were willing to fork out money. Of course, Jiang Pengji had also considered Huang Song's concerns. The recruitment this time was done in the name of celebrating the great victory. Next year, they would resume the previous recruitment routine. Huang Song asked the housekeeper, "Where is the Golden Scale Academy?" The housekeeper immediately prepared a carriage for Huang Song to travel, but it was blocked halfway. Seeing this situation, the housekeeper said embarrassedly, "Many merchants heard the news and stayed in the inn near the Golden Scale Academy. Therefore, there are especially many people nearby. Master, why don't you wait a little longer? The patrolling soldiers will clear the way for the carriages and horses." Because of the enrollment expansion, the roads near the Golden Scale Academy were often blocked by traffic. Huang Song waited for a while, then he got off the carriage and walked. The old housekeeper handed the carriage to the coachman and followed Huang Song step by step. Sutra he had to follow him, Huang Song did not know the way. Why are there so many people? Huang Song's scalp went numb when he saw the crowd outside the Golden Scale Academy. Almost every student who came to take the exam brought a group of parents with them. There were also many maids and manservants who served them. They blocked the 7-feet-wide road in front of the Golden Scale Academy tightly. His heart ached when he thought of his wife bringing along 3 children and maids to endure the hardship. In fact, Huang Song imagined too much. As his wife, Qi Chaolan had a special status. She wanted to send her children here for the exam, so there would definitely be a green passage. To prevent the examinees from affecting the studies of the students in the academy, each examinee could only be accompanied by one parent. No manservants or maids were allowed to enter. Huang Song waited for a long time. Finally, it was his turn. The guard looked at him and asked, "Where's your child?" Huang Song said, "My wife has already entered with her child." The guard could only repeat the rules of accompanying the examinee. Examinees can only be accompanied by one parent. Please wait for news at the inn outside. Huang Song widened his eyes in shock. He was stopped outside by a guard. No, no, before Huang Song could finish his words, the guard said, next. The parent behind him said, you're dressed quite extravagantly. Why don't you know the rules? Move aside. Don't block the way and waste time. My child missed the exam and can't enter the academy. What about your compensation? Huang Song was speechless. 2 months ago, if you dared to talk to him like this, your head would definitely be smashed. Huang Song was squeezed out of the crowd with a gloomy expression. His clothes were messed up, and the old housekeeper was also dragged into it. Master, there are too many people. Why don't we go back and wait for Madam? Huang Song sighed. That's fine. When he was about to return home, he saw a familiar figure standing at the door from afar. The other party was holding a lamp and looking out. Madam. Qi Chaolan brought her child home. Hearing that her husband was back, she almost cried tears of joy. She originally asked the maids to wait for news at the door, but she couldn't sit still and simply waited outside. Hearing a familiar voice, she turned her head to look in the direction of the voice. Bogeo. Before she could say 1,000 words, she was already in the other party's familiar embrace. After a long time, Qi Chaolan blushed and said, this is the main street. I don't want to be a joke. Chapter 1347. As soon as the couple entered the house, Qi Chaolan couldn't wait to ask him if he was hurt anywhere and if he had been neglected. Huang Song smiled as he listened to her nagging. He didn't feel annoyed, but he felt especially happy. Don't worry. Everything is fine. Lanting has specially instructed me that no one will make things difficult for you. Huang Song waited for her to finish speaking before he gently caressed her hand. He knew that his wife had lost weight from the touch of her skin. She used to be plump and well-proportioned, but now she was thinner. He sighed softly and said, I blame myself very much. I have to make you suffer with me in the future. I don't know what kind of situation we'll face, Qi Chaolan said angrily. I married you because I like you. In your eyes, am I the kind of person who can share joys but not sorrows? For her, the man in front of her had risked his life to come to her. This was already God's blessing. Of course, that's not what I meant. Huang Song sighed and said, it's just that, there are many despicable people in the world who add insult to injury. I don't think I've deliberately offended anyone, but, it's easy to deal with a gentleman, but it's hard to guard against a despicable person. Who knows if someone will take advantage of the situation to step on you? You've always been proud. How can you bear such humiliation? I'm not worried about the present, but the future. Huang Song was used to being looked down upon by others in his early years. After becoming a major force in Dongqing, he still had Jiang Pengji above him, who constantly made him feel pressured. There were hidden dangers internally and strong enemies externally. Huang Song didn't have much time to enjoy the happiness of being in a high position. The current situation was at most returning to the starting point for him, but it was different for Qi Chaolan. For example, he was stopped by the guards at the Golden Scale Academy just now. Before he could explain himself, he was squeezed out by the crowd. In the past, when he was in power, which guard would dare to do such a daring thing? For things like power and status, one yearned to have it when one didn't have it. When one finally had it and enjoyed the convenience and superior experience that it brought, one suddenly lost it. The strong psychological gap could not be explained clearly in a few words. Huang Song's thoughts diluted the joy of reunion. His eyebrows were tinged with worry. Qi Chaolan was also affected by this, and her mood became slightly gloomy. She took the initiative to hold Huang Song's hand tightly and said in a low voice, "As long as you don't fall, this concubine is naturally not afraid." Huang Song lowered his eyelids and nodded slightly. The couple hugged for a while in the room. Qi Chaolan asked him, "I heard that Lu Shi isn't a good person. Why did he let you off so easily?" Huang Song briefly told Qi Chaolan about his pledge of blood with Jiangpeng. Qi Chaolan's eyes reddened as she listened. She knew what Huang Song had lost because of this. With his personality, he would rather commit suicide than lose these things. Qi Chaolan could guess why he was so willing to accept the restrictions of the alliance. "Don't think too much about it. It's better this way." Huang Song knew what she was thinking. He gently patted her forehead and said with a smile, "Lanting is not as heartless as you think." Regardless of whether it was because of their friendship or because of her own calculations, she still left him a way out. Qi Chaolan looked at him in confusion. "Husband, what do you mean?" Even if it was an aristocratic family with many years of accumulation, if 3 consecutive generations did not enter officialdom, even if they had a deep foundation to support them, their vitality would be greatly damaged. The Yuan family still relied on Huang Song's support. Now that Huang Song had fallen, it was unclear what the Yuan family's attitude would be. Even if Jiang Pengji gave Huang Song the title of hereditary heir for 3 generations, how could the salary support a facade that matched his status? 3 consecutive generations could not make ends meet. Even if there was a mountain of gold and silver, it would be eaten up. Should they be thick-skinned enough to snatch food from the mouths of the merchants? Huang Song said, "The alliance only says that 3 generations of male descendants are not allowed to enter officialdom, but you and I have more than 1 male descendant." Qi Chaolan was shocked. Could it be interpreted in such a way? "At first, I didn't know what Lanting was up to, but I slowly figured it out during the journey. She really is not willing to suffer any losses." Huang Song smiled bitterly. Lanting has come to this stage. Whether it's to encroach on other countries or to defend Dongqing, the emperor's 12 crowns are indispensable. I'm afraid she's the first woman to ascend to the throne since ancient times. In troubled times, outsiders can ignore her being a woman, but once she establishes a country and proclaims herself as an emperor, some acute problems have to be brought to the surface. Qi Chaolan did not react for a moment. "What problems?" Huang Song said, "For example, having children. Lanting has yet to have children. For a country, children were not as simple as an heir. They were also a stabilizing force that stabilized people's hearts. Without children, be it the court officials or the people, who could be at ease? If the emperor passed away one day without an heir, who would be the next emperor? The world, which had been stabilized with great difficulty, would be shattered in an instant." Qi Chaolan said, "If she doesn't have children, she'll have one. The world is inherited by the heirs. Do you want the world that Lanting obtained to be a wedding dress for her husband's family?" Huang Song asked her. "Besides, as the emperor, she's above millions of people. How can there be a husband's family? If she has children, according to her temperament, most likely it will be inherited by the heiress." In this era, the Empress encountered far more trouble than ordinary male emperors. She was walking a path that her predecessor did not, so naturally, it was extremely difficult. Qi Chaolan said, "Inherited by the heiress? Then the child's biological father." Huang Song looked down and said, "Most likely killed. For her world, it's normal for a man to die." After listening to Huang Song's analysis, Qi Chaolan vaguely understood the calculations and implications behind this alliance. "Bogeo, you mean, she wants to support a woman?" Huang Song said, "This is inevitable. This will more or less reduce the pressure on the officials to choose an heir." Qi Chaolan said, "In that case, this alliance is not only not a bad thing, but a good thing?" If everything was as Huang Song had guessed, then Huang Song had worked hard even if he didn't work hard. For the sake of these ties, his branch would definitely not be too bad. If their daughter worked hard and won the Empress's favor, she would definitely have a place in the imperial court in the future. Who would dare to belittle their family? After a while, Qi Chaolan said, "She's really brave." Huang Song said, "Actually, your husband is more inclined to Lanting having a male heir in the future." Qi Chaolan pretended to be angry and said, "Why? Are you looking down on women?" Chapter 1348. In the eyes of the people, an emperor who was diligent was a good emperor. In the eyes of the officials, an emperor who was healthy, smart, serious, and had a long lifespan was a good emperor. A woman's pregnancy was a job that could not be replaced by others. The heir of the country had to be born by the Empress herself. What accidents happened during childbirth? Dystocia, hemorrhage, suffocation of the child, death of the mother. The emperor that they had raised for more than 10 years was gone just like that. How much pain would the officials feel? In her previous life, Jiang Pengji was obstructed by so many officials. The most fundamental reason was not that they thought it was bad for a woman to be the empress. After all, the devil sitting at the top had fought his way out of chaos. How could the officials care so much about the succession of the royal family? The reason why they objected was for the sake of the stability of the country. Changing emperors frequently was harmful. Medical technology in ancient times was not advanced enough. Many children would die prematurely if they had a headache or fever. It was dangerous and time-consuming for the empress to give birth. The efficiency of childbirth was also a flaw. She had never considered it before, but the problem was in front of her. She had to consider it. Qi Chaolan thought about it seriously. The problem that Huang Song mentioned was indeed difficult to solve. Then, she was about to speak when Huang Song interrupted her. Her temperament is like this. As long as she's around, no one can change her mind. No matter what outsiders said about the daughter, would Jiang Pengji listen to them? Huang Song was also happy to watch the show. If the daughter was really set as the heir, he would benefit from it. There was no reason for him to object. Qi Chaolan said, "Today, we should also make thorough preparations." The preparation she was talking about was naturally to raise her daughter like a son. The education that she should receive must not be neglected at all. Huang Song nodded and suddenly thought of his two sons' examination results. He had suffered for the entire afternoon. If the two boys did not pass, wouldn't it be embarrassing for him? What's the result of the entrance examination of Jinlin Academy in the afternoon? Qi Chaolan smiled and said, "This Jinlin Academy is far better than what the outside world says. Even the family schools of the noble families can't compare to it." Initially, she wanted to be thick-skinned and plead with her parents to at least let her child attend the clan school, so as not to delay his enlightenment. Who asked her to not be able to find a decent teacher in the entire Xiangyang district? When she visited the Golden Scale Academy by chance, she was moved and insisted on sending her child here. The two children worked hard. Their brains were better than their father's and they easily passed the entrance examination. Huang Song was surprised. That good? The gentry clans all revered the clan school, and they rarely looked at the private schools outside. However, his wife was full of praises for this private school, the Golden Scale Academy. Qi Chaolan explained the difference in detail. It was good for the clan to have good academics, but the atmosphere was also bad. Most importantly, some of the children of the poor families in the clan could still go to school. Dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and the son of a mouse can dig holes. Children from poor families always had some disgusting habits. Some didn't like to study and liked to form gangs to bully others. No matter if it was knowledge or upbringing, they could never compare to the children of the clansmen who had been brought up by a particular family. Because of these reasons, the teachers of the family would rarely be strict with their students. Naturally, the bad habits of the children could not be quickly corrected. Lady Qi had just learned that the children of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers, so she was somewhat reluctant. After taking a closer look, she realized that what she saw was very different from what she had imagined. If one didn't get to the bottom of the matter, who would know that those adorable and well-mannered children in the academy all came from commoner families? She didn't know that the Golden Scale Academy was now implementing full-time education. Except for a few second generations who could attend day school and had special privileges, most of the children were in school. There was also an additional language etiquette course in the curriculum. This change was made because someone found that the children used the unbearable words f*ck your mother to scold others during arguments. Where did he learn this vocabulary from? Naturally, it was learned from the quarrel between the neighbors when the children went home to live temporarily. Although it was a small matter, for those great scholars who regarded the Golden Scale Academy as their painstaking effort, it was naturally disgusting. The great scholars who were deeply rooted in the theory of lineage thought that it was the children's lineage that was causing trouble. A hot-tempered scholar lost his temper on the spot. He deeply felt that the Golden Scale Academy should not recruit students from commoner families. The academy provided the best education. Which headmaster of the academy was not a famous scholar with a reputation outside? With such abundant resources, even a Sao could bow and salute, but the students they taught actually scolded people f*ck your mother? Hopeless. However, Master Yuanjing felt that the children's lineage was not the most important. The most important thing was the influence of the environment around them. To teach children well, they should isolate the harmful environment and work hard to create an atmosphere suitable for learning for the students. If not, why would Mencius's mother move 3 times? Master Yuanjing's combat power was indeed not just for show. He alone suppressed all the opposing voices. Due to Master Yuanjing's status in the education world, the great scholar could only bear with it. The group of people discussed urgently again and finally finalized the rules. The children who entered the academy could stay at home for 7 days in half a year, a semester. The parents could visit the children for half a day every month to avoid alienation. If there were special matters at home, they could ask for temporary leave. In addition, the students must live in the academy for a long time. After 1 or 2 years, the atmosphere was indeed better than before. The children studied seriously, and the great scholars who had some grudges were satisfied. Those nitpicky great scholars with obsessive-compulsive disorder could be satisfied, so naturally, Lady Qi was also satisfied. Yes, so I let the children take the exam, and in the end, they even got 2 places. The only thing that made Qi Chaolan reluctant was the academy's boarding system. The parents could only see the children once a month, which made it seem like a visit to a prisoner. Huang Song smiled and said, "You are indeed the child of Lan, You are indeed capable." Qi Chaolan rolled her eyes at him in amusement. Aristocratic families generally raised their daughters well. Although the teaching was also strict, the content was biased. If they wanted to have the right to train their daughter to become an official, the matter of enlightenment should also be put on the agenda. The couple was worried about this matter. In the end, Huang Song thought of a solution. He threw his daughter to Feng Ju. Feng Ju was speechless. Did he think he was a master? Huang Song was not a fool. He knew that Qing Jing was sent to Master Yuanjing's side. He would most likely be arrested. Feng Ju was thrown to his father, Feng Run. He still had the same temperament. He was definitely an idle person. When he had nothing to do, he would raise his daughter. If Feng Ju knew his thoughts, he would definitely want to beat him to death. However, Huang Song's acting skills were comparable to Jiang Pengji's, and Feng Ju felt a faint sense of guilt towards him. In the end, he still became the teacher of Huang Song's daughter. Both father and daughter are worrisome. Feng Ju let out a long sigh. Teach the child to pass the time. Huang Song's analysis was not unreasonable. If he trained his daughter here, she would still be able to do well in the imperial court in the future. Don't let the master down. Patting the 3-year-old girl's head, she nodded seriously. Chapter 1349. If it was said that Qing Jing and Feng Ju's refusal to become officials and pledge allegiance was understandable, then Nie Sun's choice was puzzling. Although Nie Sun's illness was serious, he was still very young and his recovery ability was naturally not weak. After a period of nursing, he was more or less recovered. While Nie Sun was recuperating, Feng Jin had also tried to sound out Nie Sun's intentions. He didn't know if Nie Sun didn't understand the hint or if he pretended not to understand, but Nie Sun didn't express his stance on the recruitment. If he didn't take a stand on this matter, it would mean that he had tactfully rejected him. Feng Jin could not understand. What was so good about Huang Song that Nie Sun was willing to bet everything on him? According to his understanding of Nie Sun, he was not a stubborn person. Otherwise, why would he plot against Yuan Xian? Feng Jin hadn't been able to convince Nie Sun, so he simply sent Nie Sun back to Wanzhou to wait for his lord to recruit him. The lord was Nie Sun's cousin. What couldn't a family member say directly? Unexpectedly, before Nie Sun could see Jiang Pengji, who was leading the troops outside, he first saw another relative whom he had expected. On this day, Nie Sun heard that Huang Song and the rest had already arrived in Xiangyang district. His wife, Zhu Qingning, carried their child and sat beside him silently. "Qingyun, do you want to see that person?" While coaxing the child, she stared at her husband who she had lost and found. Ever since she received Nie Sun's letter, she hadn't had a good night's sleep. Sometimes she had nightmares, sometimes she had palpitations. In just a few days, she had become extremely haggard. Her parents were so worried about her that they gave birth to a lot of white hair. Zhu Qingning saw this and felt very uncomfortable in her heart. When she heard that her husband was fine, she felt relieved and started counting with her fingers to calculate when Nie Sun would return. When the husband and wife reunited, she, who was as meticulous as dust, discovered that her husband had something on his mind, and he became much quieter. She did not dare to ask more questions. She could only ask Nie Sun to be more kind to the child every day, hoping that the child would cheer him up again. "It's better not to see him. He probably doesn't want to see me either." Nie Sun lowered his eyes. Why add to the awkwardness? Zhu Qingning was startled after hearing this, and her movements of holding the child stiffened a little. She seemed to have never thought that the relationship between Huang Song and her husband Nie Sun would become so bad. When did this happen? "Qingyun, if you have something on your mind, why won't you tell me?" Zhu Qingning's eyes were filled with hurt and sadness. "You and I," before he finished speaking, light footsteps could be heard from outside. A figure was kneeling outside the paper door. "Master, madam, someone outside the door has sent in a visiting card and mentioned your name. He hopes that master can meet him in person." When the two of them heard the maid's voice, they could not help but frown. No matter who the visitor was, it was basic etiquette to pay a visit and send a greeting card. However, it was up to the host to decide whether or not to meet the visitor. No matter who the visitor was, the other party didn't have the right to name who he wanted to see, and it was rude of the maidservant to pass the message without permission. Nie Sun was naturally displeased with this kind of behavior. He scolded lightly, "When did you become so unruly?" The maid outside the room stammered. The person who handed over the visiting card used a carriage with the emblem of the Liu family. "He has been waiting outside the mansion for almost an hour." Housekeeper tried to persuade him, but the other party insisted on seeing master before leaving. Housekeeper had no choice but to send this servant over to report. Zhu Qingning frowned and said, "What a rude visitor. How was this a visit to the host?" It was clearly an unruly guest who came forcefully to act like a hooligan. Even if the other party's carriage had the emblem of the Lu family, Zhu Qingning did not think that her husband would be ordered around by the other party and had to show up. However, Nie Sun frowned and analyzed in his mind. In the end, he fixed his thoughts on someone. In this Xiangyang district, there were only a few people who were qualified to use the carriage of the Lu family. The identity could be determined by elimination. It was either Lu Shi, or Lu Zhao. The first two were outside, so the only possibility left was Lu Zhao. However, he had no interaction with Lu Zhao. Why did the other party make such a scene? Nie Sun said, "Let the distinguished guest wait in the flower hall for a while. I will go over after tidying up a little." There were rules when meeting a guest. Nie Sun slightly fixed his appearance to ensure that he looked energetic before he went to meet the guest. He thought that the unruly guest was Lu Zhao, but through the screen in the flower hall, the figure faintly revealed had the unique charm of a woman. It wasn't Lu Zhao. Could it be Lu Shi? However, Lu Shi was still a virgin and had a tough character. Since when did he have such a graceful figure? In terms of age, it didn't match. Within a few steps, Nie Sun had already made countless judgments in his mind. All the inferences pointed to one person. When he walked around the screen, their eyes met. That instant palpitation confirmed Nie Sun's guess. Even if they hadn't seen each other for more than 20 years, the blood in their bodies had always existed. Nie Sun stopped in his tracks. For a moment, he didn't know whether to advance or retreat. He just looked at the person with a complicated expression. This person was none other than Nie Sun's biological mother, Lu Shi's second wife, Gu Zhen. After Gu Zhen was welcomed into the flower hall, she felt as if she was sitting on pins and needles. She was extremely anxious and looked in the direction of the room from time to time. The handkerchief in her hand was almost torn by her. When she saw Nie Sun, she recognized his identity at a glance. She suddenly stood up from the seat. Her eyes were filled with tears and bloodshot. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand even tighter. Gu Zhen's lips moved and trembled. She couldn't say a complete sentence for a long time. You are. Zhu Qingning was also curious about the identity of this unwelcome guest and followed them. He didn't expect the other party to be a charming and beautiful woman. When she saw Nie Sun, she completely lost her composure. She staggered forward and touched Nie Sun's face with her trembling hands. Her fingertips couldn't help but rub the bright red cinnabar mole between his eyebrows. Zhu Qingning held the child in her arms. She first looked at it with a dumbfounded expression. Then, she was so angry that her chest felt stuffy. She didn't mind the beautiful woman's actions, but her husband's action of not dodging or avoiding her made her a little jealous. Zhu Qingning took the initiative and called out softly, "Cheng Yun, this is." Gu Zhen was brought back to her senses by her voice. She slightly lost her composure and used the handkerchief to press away the tears at the corner of her eyes. She turned to look at Zhu Qingning. "I heard, you." Gu Zhen didn't know how to address Nie Sun at that moment. Through the two letters that Meng Heng handed over, she knew that Nie Sun already knew about his family background. However, she didn't explain and recognize him. "This lady is Master Yuanjing's 5 daughters?" Gu Zhen's gaze fell on the swaddling clothes in her arms again. Although there was a certain distance between them, she felt that she had returned to the delivery room many years ago. She tried her best to give birth to the child in her womb. Before she fainted, she only had time to take a look at the child before she was carried away by the midwife. Although it was just a glance, she didn't stop recalling it for so many years. When she saw the child in the swaddling clothes, she seemed to see her son from back then. Gu Zhen couldn't help but say, this child's facial features are very similar to Qingyun's when he was born. Zhu Qingning was slightly embarrassed by Gu Zhen's words. She didn't expect Gu Zhen to have seen Nie Sun when he was a child. She was jealous just now. Why did Madame Lu visit the residence today? Chapter 1350. Gu Zhen mumbled as if she was afraid of angering Nie Sun. I heard that you came to Xiangyang district, so I dropped by to take a look. Although she said it was along the way, anyone with a discerning eye could see that she put a lot of thought into her outfit. In order to make her complexion look better, Gu Zhen specially put on delicate makeup. She had a good foundation. She had taken good care of herself over the years and dressed up carefully. She looked like she was only 24 or 25. No wonder Zhu Qingning misunderstood. Nie Sun sighed. Madame Lu, you've seen me. Gu Zhen's face turned pale. Nie Sun only said half a sentence, but the rest was definitely an excuse to chase her away. You don't want to see me that much? In a trance, she felt her heart ache so much that she couldn't breathe. Zhu Qingning broke out in a cold sweat for her. Nie Sun said, it's not that I don't want to see you, but, you and I are not the same kind of people. What can I do even if I see you? The calmer his tone was, the worse Gu Zhen felt. Her tears that she had finally stopped broke down instantly. How can we not be the same kind of people? Gu Zhen grabbed Nie Sun's shoulders with both hands and cried with her head down, do you know what happened back then was what I wanted? Every time I think of it, I want to cut Meng Zhan to death. If it wasn't for him, how could we have been separated for so many years? As a legal wife with no status, she was indeed useless. She couldn't protect her son and let him be cheated on by a concubine. He almost died on the cold ground and was trampled by thousands of people before and after his death. Gu Zhen hated him too. How could she not? Nie Sun didn't acknowledge her and she didn't force him. But why didn't he even give her a chance to make it up to him? Zhu Qingning felt more and more upset as she listened. Her eyes were filled with suspicion and she peeked at her husband secretly. I know all of this, but what can I do? What should have happened has already happened, Nie Sun said. Madame Lu, let it go. You can just assume that the baby boy was buried alive and died. I'm the adopted son of Zhongzhao's Nie family, not Meng Zhan's second son. To Nie Sun, the kindness of raising him was far greater than the kindness of giving him life. Gu Zhen was pitiful, but did Nie Sun deserve it? His life was not only brought about by the woman in front of him, but she also missed out on more than just a son. Apart from being related by blood, how were they different from strangers? He did not owe Gu Zhen, and Gu Zhen did not owe him either. There was no point in trying to make it up to her. Nie Sun was willing to treat Gu Zhen as an elder, but he could not force himself to adore her like an adoptive mother. The relationship between parents and children was not something that could be determined by blood. Zhu Qingning listened to their conversation and realized that the Mrs. Lu in front of her was Lu Shi's second wife, her husband's biological mother. At this time, the daughter in his arms also cried. Babies could not care less about adults. They would cry if they wanted to, regardless of the occasion, place, or time. When Gu Zhen saw this, she immediately held back the sobs in her throat and wiped the tears on her face with a handkerchief. She did not care about her ruined makeup. Zhu Qingning touched it and said in a low voice, he probably peed. This concubine will call the wet nurse over. Is Madame willing to help look after him? Of course, Gu Zhen could not ask for more. When the unique milky fragrance of a baby wafted into her nose, the tears that she had stopped with great difficulty gushed out again. The baby girl in front of him was the daughter of that child. Time passed so quickly. Gu Zhen did not know whether she should be happy or sad. Nie Sun was helpless with his wife's actions. He had wanted to directly cut off Gu Zhen's thoughts. It was enough for the two families to maintain a superficial friendship. There was no need for them to have a deep relationship and talk about relatives. Gu Zhen lowered her head and coaxed the child. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito, as if raising her voice would make Nie Sun unhappy. In the face of such a situation, even a rational person like Nie Sun could not help but feel sympathetic. His calm heart was in chaos. I have no intention of forcing you to acknowledge me. I just want to see if you are doing well and if there is anything I can help with. Gu Zhen spoke in a submissive tone. The more she acted this way, the harder it was for Nie Sun to be forceful. Nie Sun said, I am very well. Gu Zhen said in a pleading tone, then can I come over to see this child often? Nie Sun said, I'm afraid it will be inconvenient. Gu Zhen's face turned completely pale. It was as if someone had stabbed her heart with a knife. Zhu Qingning came over just in time to hear these two sentences. She rolled her eyes at her husband. Why did he only say half of what he wanted to say? She said, does Madame Lu like this child very much? Gu Zhen knew that Zhu Qingning was her daughter-in-law. Unfortunately, her son could not recognize her, much less her daughter-in-law. Of course I like him very much. Zhu Qingning said, if Madame Lu likes him, I will bring the child to visit your residence when I am free. Is that all right? Nie Sun's expression changed, but he did not interrupt her. Gu Zhen nodded hurriedly and could not contain her joy. How can this be considered a visit? If you come, you can stay here permanently. Qingyun's current identity is a little. In order to prove his innocence, it is naturally not appropriate to make it public. Visitors to the residence will be pushed back as much as possible. Madame Lu, don't take his words to heart. That is his temperament. Zhu Qingning said with a smile, let the wet nurse bring the child away to change first. After hearing Zhu Qingning's words, Gu Zhen felt much better. She faintly looked forward to it. She handed the child to the wet nurse who had been waiting for a long time. After some thought, she took off the bracelet on her wrist. I came in a hurry today and did not bring any greeting gifts. I saw that the child was fated with me, and I liked him very much at first sight. Gu Zhen let Zhu Qingning accept the greeting gift on behalf of the child. She said humbly, this bracelet has been with me for many years. It is quite old. Please don't dislike it. Zhu Qingning had good taste. Naturally, she could see that Gu Zhen's gift was really good. Since it was a gift from her grandmother to her granddaughter, she did not stand on ceremony and accepted it, lest she made the other party sad. She watched reluctantly as the child was carried away by the wet nurse. Gu Zhen only retracted her gaze when the child was out of sight. I also know Lanting's temperament. If it is because of this matter, Nie Sun knew what she wanted to say and flatly refused, no. Gu Zhen could only swallow the rest of her words. Zhu Qingning saw that the atmosphere, which had eased with great difficulty, was stiff again. He felt helpless. Then why? Nie Sun said directly, I have no intention of becoming an official again. Why? Gu Zhen did not seem to expect such an answer from him. She could not help but ask, could it be that Lanting is unwilling? Nie Sun was Jiang Pengji's biological cousin in name and by blood. They were a family. It was not to say that they were completely biased, but they would secretly take care of each other. Huang Song had already been defeated. What was wrong with Nie Sun, as an old official, choosing a new master to assist? Nie Sun looked down and said, no, it is my own reason. No matter how terrible Yuan Xian was or what disagreements he had with Nie Sun, the only person who could deal with him was Huang Song. However, Nie Sun had bypassed Huang Song and plotted to kill Yuan Xian. No matter what his reason was, at the end of the day, it was also a betrayal to Huang Song. At the same time, it was also the most taboo action of a person in a high position. Who would not be disgusted if officials killed each other because of personal disagreements? When Nie Sun made up his mind to kill Yuan Xian, he had already made a decision. If Huang Song won, he would resign from Huang Song and live in seclusion. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.